Hey, a man woke up at 2 a.m. to the sound of his tent zipper moving. Not fast, slow, 1 inch at a time from the outside. His zipper pull was still hooked to the inside loop, exactly where he left it before sleep. Something else was working it from outside. He was alone on a primitive campsite in a hollow off an unmarked fire road in eastern Kentucky. No other camper within 6 miles. He got out. He drove home without stopping. He never went back to that hollow. But to understand what was working that zipper, you have to start at the gas station where an old man told him exactly one thing and then walked away. Marcus had been separated for 6 weeks when he found the listing. It was on an outdoor forum, buried under a thread about primitive camping spots in eastern Kentucky, posted by someone with a username that no longer existed. The listing described a hollow off an unmarked fire road past mile marker 9 on a state forest boundary road. No facilities, no fee, no registration. Just a flat clearing beside a creek, deep in the trees, with enough room for a tent and a fire ring someone had already built from flat stones. He needed to be somewhere that was not his apartment. That was the only qualification. He left on a Friday afternoon with a cooler, a 2-man tent he had bought years ago for a trip that never happened, a bag of firewood from a hardware store, and a paper map he had printed at work, because the forum post mentioned there was no signal past mile marker 9. He stopped for gas about 40 minutes from the hollow. The station was the last one before the state forest boundary, a small place with 2 pumps and a hand-painted sign advertising night crawlers and block ice. The man behind the counter was old, not frail, just old in the way that men get when they have worked outside their whole lives. He asked Marcus where he was headed. Marcus told him the hollow name from the forum post. The old man stopped what he was doing. He did not look up. He said, "Don't whistle after dark down there." Then he handed Marcus his change and turned back to whatever he had been doing. Marcus said thanks, assumed it was a bat thing or maybe coyotes, and drove on. He found the fire road without any trouble. The paper map was good. The hollow was better than he expected. A flat shelf of land above a small creek, hardwood trees all around, the fire ring right where the post said it would be. He set up the tent while there was still light, got the cooler situated, and broke up some of the firewood. The creek was loud when he first arrived. He could hear it clearly from the campsite, the sound of it running over rocks about 30 feet below the bank. Then it went quiet. He noticed it the way you notice when a refrigerator stops humming. Not a dramatic silence, just an absence where there had been sound. He walked down the bank to check. The creek was still running, still moving over the same rocks, still doing exactly what a creek does. He stood there and listened. He could hear it fine from right beside it. He walked back up to the campsite. Quiet again. He stood there for a moment, head tilted, and then told himself it was an acoustic trick of the hollow. Sound bounces strangely in narrow valleys. Wind direction, elevation, the shape of the trees. He had read something like that once. He accepted it and built his fire. The evening was good. That is the part Marcus remembers being surprised by, how normal it felt. He cooked over the fire, drank 2 beers from the cooler, watched the flames die to coals. The hollow was dark in the way that places without any artificial light are dark, which is a different kind of dark than most people are used to. His phone showed no signal, and he had turned the screen brightness down to save the battery. Around 9, he put on some music, low, just to have something. Around 10, he was whistling along to a song without thinking about it. He stopped mid-note when he remembered the old man. He laughed at himself. He put the phone away. By 11, the coals were almost out, and he was tired enough to sleep. He got into the tent, zipped it closed, lay back on his sleeping bag with his boots still on because the ground was damp and the tent floor was thin. He had not bothered to stake the rain fly. The sky above the hollow had been clear all evening. He could see a few stars through the mesh of the tent ceiling. He was asleep inside of 10 minutes. He did not hear the creek go quiet a second time. He was not awake for whatever moved through the dark between the trees and the tent. He did not know about any of that. What woke him was the feeling of pressure against the tent wall. Not a sound. Pressure. The nylon on his left side, the side facing away from the creek, was moving slowly inward, as if something flat and wide was pressing against the outside of the fabric. Not pushing hard, not tearing, just pressing, the way you might press a hand against a wall to feel if it is warm. The fabric bowed inward, maybe 2 inches, and held there. Marcus did not move. He lay on his back and stared at the tent ceiling and did not breathe for a long time. The fabric stayed bowed. Then it eased back out slowly, the same way it had come in. He heard nothing. No footsteps, no brush moving, no sound from outside at all. He lay still for another 20 minutes, maybe longer. Nothing else happened. He finally turned his head and looked at the tent zipper on his left side. The pull was still on the inside loop, exactly where he had put it. He was alone, and the tent was closed, and nothing was inside with him. Old cabins make noise. Old tents do too. He told himself it was the fabric contracting in the cold, or a branch he hadn't seen. He lay back down. He put his keys in his hand, which he did not consciously decide to do. He closed his eyes. He was almost asleep when the tent wall pressed inward again. This time, he counted. The pressure held for 11 seconds. He counted them in his head, one number at a time, the way you count when you're trying not to make a sound. Then it eased back out. Same slow release. Same total silence around it. He did not sleep again. He lay on his back with his keys in his fist and his boots on his feet, and he waited. The hollow was completely quiet. Not quiet the way a forest is quiet at night, with small rustlings and distant sounds and the occasional branch settling. Quiet in the way that makes you aware of your own breathing, your own heartbeat, the small sounds your body makes that you never notice when there is anything else to listen to. The creek was still. The trees were still. Whatever makes a forest sound alive had stopped. He checked the zipper pull. Still on the inside loop. He checked his phone. No signal. 2:14 a.m., 11% battery. The nearest paved road was 6 miles back on that fire road. His truck was up the slope from the tent, maybe 30 yards, invisible from where he lay. The fire was out. The hollow was black outside the thin nylon walls. He decided he would not open the tent. That was the decision, and he made it clearly and deliberately. Whatever was outside, he was not going to open the tent and look at it. He was going to wait until he could see daylight through the mesh ceiling, and then he was going to get up, walk to the truck, and drive out. 2 hours passed. Nothing pressed against the wall again. He had almost convinced himself it was over when the zipper started to move. Not the tent wall this time, the zipper itself. The main zipper on the tent door, the one that ran from the bottom left corner up and around to the right. It began to move upward. 1 inch. Pause. 1 inch. Pause. He could hear the individual teeth of the zipper separating, that small plastic clicking sound, in the total silence of the hollow. The pull on his side, the inside pull, was moving. Not being pulled from inside, where his hand was not touching it, moving on its own, tracking upward with the outside pull, because something outside was pulling the corresponding zipper from the other side of the door. He watched it by the light of his phone screen, which he had turned on and held flat against his chest to keep the glow low. 1 inch. Pause. The old man's voice came back to him then. Not as a memory he had to search for, just there, the same flat tone. "Don't whistle after dark down there." He had whistled. He had sat at his fire and whistled along to a song at 10 o'clock at night in a hollow with no name on any map he had ever seen. And whatever that warning was meant to prevent, he had already done the thing. He did not know why that mattered. He still does not know why it matters. But in the tent at 2 a.m., with the zipper moving 1 inch at a time, it mattered. It felt like cause and effect. It felt like something he had set in motion without understanding the mechanism. The zipper stopped. It had moved about 4 inches up from the bottom. Not enough to open the tent. Not even close. But it stopped and did not move again, and the silence outside remained total. And Marcus lay on his back until the mesh ceiling above him went from black to dark gray to the pale gray of early morning. When he could see the outline of the trees through the ceiling, he got up. He did not look at the outside of the tent first. He unzipped the door from the inside, pushed it open, and stepped out without looking back. He walked up the slope to his truck in the gray pre-dawn light, got in, locked the doors, and sat with the engine running until it was fully light. He did not turn on the radio. When the sun was up enough to see clearly, he got out and walked back down to the tent. He needed his cooler. He told himself that. But he also looked at the ground and at the tent before he touched anything. The zipper pull on the outside of the tent door was bent, not broken, not torn. Bent slightly upward at an angle that had not been there when he bought it or when he set the tent up the previous afternoon. Something had put enough pressure on it to change the angle of the metal. He looked at the ground around the tent. He had set it up on a patch of soft earth between the fire ring and the bank, and the ground held prints well. His boot prints going in were clear and deep. There were no other prints, not boot prints, not animal prints, nothing. But on the far side of the tent, the side that had pressed inward twice in the night, the earth was compressed. A wide, flat compression in the soft ground, roughly the shape of something that had stood there without moving for a long time. No edges sharp enough to be a boot. No claw marks, no distinct toes. Just a wide, flat depression, as if something very heavy had simply rested its weight on that spot of earth for an extended period and then was not there. He took the cooler. He left the tent. He drove the 6 miles of fire road without music, without the radio, watching the road and the trees on either side. He did not see anything. He reached the paved road and turned south. At the gas station, the woman behind the counter was maybe 40, efficient, not unfriendly. The old man was not there. Marcus described him, the approximate age, the way he had spoken, the thing he had said about the hollow. The woman looked at him for a moment and then said that the man who used to work the morning shift had passed away 2 winters back. She said it simply, not dramatically, the way you state a fact about someone you knew and have had time to accept losing. Marcus paid for a coffee he didn't drink and drove home. He never filed a report. He never posted on the forum. The account came to us 3 years later, from a cousin he told the story to at a family dinner, who submitted it anonymously to a camping incident thread with a note that said Marcus had asked him not to use his real name. The cousin included one detail that Marcus had not mentioned in the telling. When a group of hikers used that same hollow the following weekend, they found the campsite exactly as Marcus had left it. Tent still standing. Cooler still there. Fire ring with old ash. Door of the tent unzipped and open, the way someone might leave it to air out, or the way someone might leave it if they had gone somewhere and not come back. Marcus had been too scared to go back for any of it. He does not camp alone. He has not whistled outside after dark since that night. Not once, not even in his own backyard. He does not explain why when people ask. He just stops, the way you stop a habit when the habit starts to mean something it didn't before. The tent is still somewhere in that hollow, probably. Weathered down by now, the nylon faded and the poles bent from a season or two of snow. The creek still runs below the bank. The fire ring is still there. According to the cousin, Marcus said only one thing when he finished the story at that family dinner, said it quietly, almost to himself. He said he kept thinking about the timing. Not that the zipper moved, that it stopped when he stopped moving. That whatever was outside knew when he was still and when he wasn't, and it adjusted. That was the part he couldn't explain away. Not the sound, the timing. The next account is different in almost every way. Different state, different season, different kind of road. But the person who experienced it describes the same feeling Marcus did. The feeling that something out there understood exactly where she was. Her name is Dina. She has driven the same back road through the West Virginia mountains for 15 years. She knows every curve on that road, which is why what happened on a foggy night in late October still does not make sense to her, or to anyone she has told it to. Dina had made that drive so many times she could do it half asleep, which is more or less what she was doing when it started. She had spent the day at her mother's house in a small town on the eastern side of the ridge, the kind of visit that runs long without anything particular happening. Coffee in the morning, lunch, a few things fixed around the house, dinner that stretched past 8. By the time she got on the road, it was close to 10, and the fog had come down off the ridge the way it does in late October, not all at once, but in layers, thickening as she climbed. She was not worried about it. She had driven that road in worse. The back road saved her 40 minutes over the highway route, and she had used it since she was 19 years old, first as a passenger in her father's truck, and then on her own. It was a 2-lane road that climbed through a series of hairpin curves before leveling off on a ridge and dropping back down the other side into the valley where she lived. No streetlights, no shoulders to speak of on the upper curves. On a clear night, you could see the lights of 3 counties from the top. On a foggy night, you could see maybe 40 feet in front of your headlights, sometimes less. She had a half-eaten gas station sandwich on the passenger seat and the radio on low. Something country she wasn't really listening to. She passed the curve where the guardrail had been replaced 2 summers ago, past the wide spot where people sometimes pulled over to look at the view, past the old barn foundation on the left that had been collapsing incrementally for as long as she could remember. Then she passed the mailbox. It sat on a leaning post at the edge of the road, a silver rural mailbox with a dent in the front panel and a hinge on the lid that had rusted open at a slight angle. She had used it as a landmark for years. When she saw that mailbox, she knew she was 12 minutes from the paved county road and home. She noted it the way you note a familiar landmark, automatically, not really thinking about it. 7 minutes later, the same mailbox appeared on her right. She slowed. She looked at it through the passenger window as she passed. Same lean to the post. Same dent in the front panel. Same rusted lid angle. The numbers on the side were the same faded red she had always known. She had not turned around. She had not passed any side roads or intersections. The road on that stretch ran straight in one direction. She kept driving. She told herself there were 2 of them. Old rural roads sometimes had matching mailboxes, the same cheap model bought from the same hardware store by neighboring properties years apart. She had just never noticed the second one. She had been tired. The fog played tricks. The fog thickened as she came around a long curve, pressing down into the beam of her headlight so that the light seemed to stop in the air rather than reach the road. She slowed to 25. Then she saw the man. He was standing at the roadside on her right, just past the curve. Heavyset, dark jacket, hands at his sides. No flashlight, no reflective vest, nothing. He was just standing there in the fog at the edge of the road in the middle of the night. She did not stop. You do not stop on a mountain road in fog for a stranger at 10:30 at night. She passed him, maybe 6 feet of clearance, and she checked her rearview mirror. He was not there. Not walking away, not stepping back from the road. The mirror showed the rear of her car and the fog closing in behind it and nothing else. She told herself the fog had swallowed him. She told herself the curve had taken him out of the mirror's angle. She drove on, but the road shoulder on that curve was 6 inches wide at most, a narrow strip of gravel before the bank dropped away. There was no safe place for a person to stand there. There was barely room to stand at all. 5 minutes later, the mailbox appeared again. She stopped the car in the middle of the road. She put her foot on the brake and sat there with the engine running and the headlights cutting into 40 feet of fog, and the radio so quiet she could barely hear it. The mailbox was on her right, same post, same dent, same lid. She was facing the same direction she had been facing since she turned onto the back road. She had not made a loop. She had not turned around. There was no loop to make. She sat there for almost 2 minutes. Nothing moved in the fog. The radio shifted to static between stations and she turned it off. The silence in the car felt very loud. She rolled the window down and listened. No wind, no animals, no sound of another vehicle anywhere on the mountain. Just the idle of her own engine and the faint drip of condensation off the tree branches above the road. She rolled the window back up. She looked at her phone. No signal, which she had expected. But the GPS app had cached a map segment before she lost service, and it was still showing her position as a moving blue dot on a gray road. She watched it for a moment. According to the map, she was on a straight 2-mile section of road between the upper curve and the ridge. No intersections, no loops, no alternate routes. The road went one direction and ended at the county road on the other side of the ridge. That was all it did. She put the car in drive and kept going. The mailbox appeared a 4th time. She did not stop this time. She pulled up alongside it, put the car in the park with the engine still running, and got out. The cold hit her immediately, that wet October cold that comes with fog, and she stood in the road beside her open car door and looked at the mailbox. Up close, it was exactly what it had always been. Dented front panel, rusted lid hinge, leaning post. There was a name on the side, stenciled in faded black letters, mostly worn off. She could make out most of it. She took out her phone and photographed it with the flash because the headlights were at the wrong angle, and the flash was the only way to get the letters clearly. She was standing there looking at the photo on her screen when the radio came back on. She had turned it off. She remembered turning it off. She had reached over and pressed the button when she stopped in the road the first time, and she had not touched it since. But it was on, and it was producing something. Not music, not a station, not static exactly. Something that had the rhythm of a voice. She stood outside the car with the door open and the dome light on, and she listened to it. And after a moment she got back in because she did not want to be standing outside in the fog anymore. The sound from the radio was not clear. It was layered under static, warped, the way a voice sounds on a very bad connection, or through water, or at the far end of a long tunnel. But it had the shape of a word, maybe 2 words. It had the shape of her name. Not a recording of her name, not someone saying it cleanly. More like the idea of her name filtered through something that did not quite understand how voices were supposed to work. She turned the radio off again. She put the car in drive. She did not look at the mailbox as she passed it. The road straightened. The fog thinned slightly on the upper ridge. She reached the paved county road in 4 minutes, and turned onto it and kept driving until she was home with the garage door closed behind her. Her husband was still awake. She sat at the kitchen table and told him what had happened, the mailbox appearing 4 times, the man in the dark jacket, the radio. He listened without interrupting, which was not his usual habit. When she was finished, he asked to see the photo she had taken at the mailbox. She pulled it up on her phone and handed it to him. He looked at it for a long moment. Then he set the phone face down on the table and sat back. She asked him what the name was. He told her it was a family that had owned a small property on that road, 40 or 50 acres, back in the 90s. There had been a fire. The house burned in the summer of 1997, and the family moved away and never came back. The property had never been sold, as far as he knew. It was still listed in county records under the same family name, taxes unpaid for years, the land just sitting there. He said the county had talked about rerouting the road around that section at some point, but the work had never been funded. Dina asked him to look at the photo again. She needed to know the name was what she thought it was. He did not pick the phone back up. He said he was sure about it. He did not look at the photo again that night or, as far as she knows, ever. She looked at it. She looked at it more carefully than she had at the roadside, now that she was in her kitchen with the overhead light on and the familiar sounds of her house around her. The mailbox name was clear in the flash. And behind the mailbox in the background of the photo, visible in the white edge of the flash where it reached into the fog, was the man in the dark jacket, standing with his back to the camera, facing the road she had come from, not moving, not turned toward her even slightly, even though she had been standing 6 feet away when the flash went off. She had been alone at that mailbox. She had looked in every direction before she got out of the car. There had been no one there. In the morning, she drove the road. She left early before 8, when the fog had burned off and the ridge was clear and the light was good. She drove the entire length of the back road from one end to the other, and she did not see anything wrong with it. The road was a road. The curves were where they had always been. The mailbox was there once, in one location, exactly where it had always stood for as long as she could remember. It was the only mailbox on that road. No second one anywhere on the stretch she had driven 4 times the night before. She did not stop to look at it closely. She did not take another photo. She drove through and came out the other side and took the highway home. She has taken the highway every time since. She adds 40 minutes to every drive between those 2 towns, and she does not complain about it. She has not used the back road in 4 years. She told us she thought about it a few times in the first year. Thought about how much time she was adding up. Thought about how the road had never done anything to her in 15 years, and one strange night should not change that. She thought about it, and then she took the highway anyway. The photo is still in her camera roll. She has never deleted it. She has shown it to 3 people, and all 3 of them had the same reaction her husband did. They looked at it, they set the phone down, and they did not want to look at it again. None of them have explained why. She does not know why either. She just knows that when she scrolls past it, she does not stop. The man in the photo is facing the empty road. His hands are at his sides. He is standing very still. She does not know who he is. She does not know how he got there. She was alone at that mailbox. The next account is shorter, and in some ways, it is the one that stays with you the longest. It came to us from the man's daughter, who said her father told it once at a family gathering and never told it again. He is still alive. He still hunts the same land. He just doesn't go alone anymore, and he will not say more than that when people ask. His name is Ray, and it was a November morning on a ridge in eastern Tennessee, and what he heard in the hollow below him is the thing he still will not talk about directly, even now. Carla found the guest book while Ben was working on the wood stove. They had arrived late, closer to 9 than the 7 they had planned for, because the gravel road that led to the cabin was not on the GPS, and they had driven past the turnoff twice before Carla spotted the small wooden sign, half hidden by an overgrown rhododendron. The road was narrow and steep, and it took about 10 minutes to cover the last mile and a half, the headlights picking up gravel and tree trunks, and occasional flashes of the drop-off on the passenger side. By the time they pulled up to the cabin, they were both a little frayed. The cabin itself was fine. Better than fine, actually. It was old, but solid. A low structure with a covered porch across the front and a wood stove visible through the window. Everything clean and in reasonable order. Ben found the lockbox, got the key, and they carried in the groceries and the wine and the overnight bags while the porch light buzzed against the moths. Ben got the wood stove going while Carla unpacked the groceries and opened the wine and looked around. The cabin had the kitchen and main room at the front, a loft accessible by a steep wooden staircase on the right side, a front bedroom just off the main room, and a hallway at the back that led to a second bedroom. There was a narrow bathroom between the 2 bedrooms. The whole place smelled like cedar and old wood smoke, and something faintly herbal, like dried lavender or rosemary, that Carla eventually traced to a small bundle hanging above the kitchen window. The guest book was on the coffee table in front of the wood stove. A standard hardcover journal, black, with a handwritten label on the front that said "Guest Book" in someone's careful printing. Carla took her wine to the couch and opened it. The entries went back 8 years. Some were short, just a date and a few words. Others were long, whole paragraphs about the view from the porch, the hiking nearby, the quality of the wood stove, the wildlife they had seen from the windows. People mentioned the loft, said it was cozy, said the skylight above the bed up there was perfect for watching stars. They mentioned the front porch. They mentioned the wood stove by name, practically, the way you mention something that works better than you expected. They mentioned the front bedroom, the bathroom, the kitchen. Several entries mentioned the drive-in and how it seemed worse than it was. Nobody mentioned the back bedroom. Carla read every entry in the book, back to front, front to back. 43 entries over 8 years. Not one of them referenced the back bedroom, the hallway, or anything at the rear of the cabin. It was as if the back half of the building did not register for any previous guest. She thought about it for a moment and decided that some guests probably just slept in the loft, which the listing had described as a sleeping option, and that the back bedroom was maybe a secondary space that people didn't bother mentioning because it was unremarkable. She mentioned it to Ben when he came over with his own wine. He shrugged and said maybe they all slept in the loft. They toasted their anniversary and put another log on the fire and did not think about it again. Ben noticed the lock when they brought their bags to the back bedroom. The front bedroom had a standard interior door handle with a simple push-button privacy lock, the kind you find in every rental cabin. The back bedroom door had a different lock entirely, an old deadbolt, surface-mounted, heavy, the kind that required a key from the outside and a thumb turn from the inside. It was unlocked. The hardware was a different age and finish from everything else in the cabin, darker metal, older style, as if it had been installed by someone else at a different time for a different reason. Ben looked at it for a moment and set their bags down. The room itself was normal enough. Queen bed with a clean white duvet, small dresser with a mirror, one window on the north wall. The window was painted shut, the frame sealed with what looked like several layers of old paint, the kind of accumulation that happens over decades. It had not been opened in a very long time. Ben tried it anyway, got no movement, and let it go. North-facing windows in old mountain cabins got damp and were often sealed against the weather. It made sense. He set their bags down and they went back to the fire. They went to bed around 11. The wood stove had warmed the main room thoroughly, but the back bedroom was cooler, the way rooms at the rear of old cabins often are, and Carla pulled the extra blanket from the closet shelf and they went to sleep without any trouble. At 2 a.m, she woke up. The sound was beneath the floor. Not pipes, not the stove, not the cabin settling in the way old structures settle when the temperature drops at night. Those sounds have a randomness to them, an irregularity. This sound had rhythm, a slow, even rhythm, like something moving in a deliberate cycle, something that expanded and contracted at a pace that her sleeping brain had registered as wrong before her waking brain caught up. It sounded like breathing. She lay still and listened. After a few seconds, she put her hand on Ben's shoulder and he came awake quickly. She did not say anything. She just pointed at the floor. He listened. His face changed. The sound continued for what she estimated was 3 or 4 minutes, steady and rhythmic, and then it stopped. Clean stop, not a fade, not a trail off. Just there and then not there, the way a machine stops when someone turns it off. Ben got up and looked at the floor. He walked the length of the room slowly, pressing on boards, looking for a hatch or a seam that might indicate a crawlspace access. He found nothing. No hatch, no unusual gap, no hardware that suggested any kind of opening. The floor was solid. He came back to bed and they lay there together in the dark, and after a while they slept again. The way you sleep when nothing else happens and exhaustion wins out. In the morning, Carla checked the cabin listing on her phone while Ben made coffee. She wanted to see if there was any mention of a crawl space, any property detail that might explain the sound. She pulled up the listing on the small rental site. 2 bedrooms, loft, wood stove, porch, mountain views. She looked at the photos. There was a photo of the main room, a photo of the loft, a photo of the front bedroom, a photo of the porch, a photo of the exterior. There was no photo of the back bedroom. She counted the bedroom photos again. 1 bedroom shown. The description said 2 bedrooms, but the second photo that should have been a bedroom was the loft, which was technically a sleeping space but not a bedroom. The back bedroom, the room they had slept in, the room with the old deadbolt and the sealed window and the floor that had breathed at 2 a.m, did not appear anywhere in the listing. It was not described. It was not photographed. It was not acknowledged in any way. She set her phone down and looked at the hallway that led to that room, and drank her coffee and did not say anything to Ben yet. She was still thinking about the guest book. 43 entries, not one mention of the back bedroom. And now a listing that did not include it either. The cabin had a room that nobody talked about, and something in the floor of that room had been breathing. Ben called the rental contact after breakfast. The number was on a card in the lockbox, a local number with no name attached, just the digits and a handwritten note that said, "Call with any questions." Ben sat on the porch in the cold morning air with his coffee and dialed. It rang 4 times before a man picked up. Ben described the sound they had heard. He asked about a crawlspace under the back bedroom. The man was quiet for a moment. Not a short pause, not a thinking pause. A long pause, the kind that has weight to it. Then he said there was no crawlspace under that cabin. He said the cabin was built on a slab. He said this with the tone of someone stating something they are very certain of, the way you speak about facts you have known for a long time, and do not expect to be questioned about. Ben thanked him and hung up and sat on the porch for a while longer. Then he went back inside and looked at the floor of the back bedroom again. He had looked at it the night before in the dark and under stress. Now he looked at it in the morning light coming through the painted shut window, what little of it got through the old glass. The floorboards in the back bedroom were a different wood from the rest of the cabin. The main room, the front bedroom, the hallway, all had the same wide pine boards, the gray-gold color of old pine that has been walked on for decades. The back bedroom floor was narrower boards, darker, a different species of wood entirely, laid in a slightly different direction. Not dramatically different. The kind of difference you would not notice if you were not specifically looking for it. The kind of difference that meant the floor had been added at a different time than the rest of the cabin. He was still looking at it when Carla came in and handed him a torn piece of paper. She had found it in the guest book, tucked into the back cover, not an entry in the book, but a loose page that had been ripped from elsewhere. The tier was not clean. It looked like someone had pulled a page from a different notebook and put it here, or pulled this page from the guest book itself at some point, and then tucked it back, or torn it in a hurry. The page had writing on both sides, but the bottom half of both sides had been torn away, so each side ended mid-sentence. The front side described an anniversary trip. A couple like them. The dates matched the same time of year, early November, 4 years ago. They had stayed in the back bedroom because the loft was cold. The writing described the wood stove, the drive-in, the view from the porch. Then it described waking up to a sound below the floor of the back bedroom. The writer described it as rhythmic. The writer described it as difficult to explain to anyone who had not heard it. The last full sentence on the front side read, "We did not go back to sleep after the second night." The back side of the page picked up mid-sentence and continued for several lines and then tore off. The last complete sentence visible was, "We did not open the door in the morning." Carla had read it twice before she brought it to Ben. She did not know what door the writer meant. The back bedroom door was right there, standing open, the old deadbolt retracted. The only other door in the immediate area was the exterior door at the back of the hallway, a door that led to the small back porch. She had opened that door the night before when she was looking around. It opened onto a narrow porch with a rusted metal chair and a view of the woods behind the cabin. She had not thought about it again until now. She photographed the torn page on her phone and put it back in the guest book. Ben decided to call the rental contact again and ask about the different floorboards. He got no answer. He tried twice more over the course of the morning and got no answer either time. They had planned to stay through Sunday. This was Saturday morning. The plan had been a second night, a slow morning, and a drive home in the afternoon. They talked about leaving early. Carla said she thought they should. Ben said they had paid for the second night and the nearest decent motel was 30 miles down the mountain, and it seemed like a lot of disruption for what was probably a structural explanation. They just didn't have enough information to understand. Old cabins had odd sounds. The slab claim might have been wrong. The contact might have been mistaken about the construction. There might be a partial crawl space under one section that the contact didn't know about or hadn't thought to mention. These were reasonable points. Carla knew they were reasonable points. Then Ben went to move the car to a better spot in the gravel drive and found the slow leak. There was a nail in the right rear tire, the kind of flat nail that gravel roads collect and redistribute, and the tire had been losing air slowly since the night before. It was not flat yet, but it would be by evening. Ben had a spare, but the spare on that car was a small temporary tire, not rated for mountain roads at speed, and the nearest tire shop was 30 miles away. Driving down on the temporary in daylight was manageable. Driving down on it after dark on that road was not something either of them wanted to do. They decided to stay the second night. They spent the afternoon on the front porch, away from the back of the cabin, and drove into the small town at the base of the mountain for supplies around 4. The town was not much. A gas station, a small grocery, a hardware store that closed at 3. Carla went into the grocery while Ben stayed in the car with the heater running. The woman at the register was maybe 55, unhurried, the kind of efficient that comes from years of knowing exactly where everything in a small store is. She made conversation the way people in small stores do, asking where Carla was staying, whether she was enjoying the area. Carla mentioned the road and described the cabin's location. The woman set down the item she was scanning. She did not look up. She said, "Don't go in the back room after dark." She said it the way you say something you have said before, or something you have heard said so many times it has become automatic. Not a dramatic warning. Not a story attached to it. Just the words. Flat and certain, in the same tone she had been using to discuss the weather. Carla said they were already sleeping in it. The woman did not respond. She picked up the next item and scanned it. She finished ringing Carla's groceries and gave her the total and bagged everything without making eye contact again. When Carla said thank you at the door, the woman nodded at the register without looking up. Carla sat in the car and told Ben what the woman had said. Ben was quiet for a moment. Then he said the woman probably said that to anyone who rented that cabin, probably some local story about the property, probably not based on anything real. He said it the way you say something when you are trying to convince yourself as much as the other person. They drove back up the mountain. The cell signal dropped at the first curve, the way it always did, and did not come back. That night, the back bedroom was colder than the night before. Carla put on an extra layer before bed. The wood stove in the main room was going, but the heat did not reach the back of the cabin the way it had the first night. Or maybe it did, and the room was just harder to warm now that they knew what they were listening for. They lay in the dark and did not speak. Ben had his phone face down on the nightstand with the flashlight app loaded and ready. The breathing started at 11:40, earlier than the night before. The same rhythm, the same steady expansion and contraction, the same quality of something deliberate and patient. But this time, after about 2 minutes of it, there was something else. 3 slow knocks from below. Evenly spaced, each one separated by about 4 seconds. Then silence. Then 3 more. Ben got the flashlight. He went over the floor again, more carefully this time, running the light along every seam between boards. At the far end of the room, near the exterior wall, he found a gap between 2 boards that was slightly wider than the others. Maybe a 1/4 inch, maybe a little more. He lay down on the floor and put his eye to it first. He could see nothing. He put the flashlight beam against it and angled it down. The gap was too narrow to illuminate anything clearly. He could see the underside of the subfloor and then darkness. But the air that came up through the gap was warm. Not warm like a heating duct, not warm like a mechanical source. Warm the way a living space is warm when something has been in it long enough to raise the ambient temperature. The cabin above the floor was cold enough that both of them had been sleeping in extra layers. Whatever was below that floor was generating heat. They did not discuss it. They got their shoes and their coats and their keys and their phones, and they went out to the car. Ben turned the heat on and they sat in the gravel drive with the doors locked. Carla looked at the cabin through the windshield. All the lights were on inside because they had left them on. The porch light buzzed against nothing. The tree line beyond the cabin was black. They sat in the car until first light. Neither of them slept. They did not talk much. Once, around 3 in the morning, Carla thought she heard something move on the back porch of the cabin, the narrow porch with the rusted chair. But she was not certain, and she did not get out to check, and Ben did not ask her what she had heard. At first light, Ben drove them down the mountain on the temporary spare. Slowly, carefully, both of them watching the road. They made the highway without incident and found a tire shop that opened at 7:30. While they waited for the tire, Ben sent an email to the rental contact describing everything that had happened. He was calm in the email, factual, not accusatory. He described the breathing sound, the knocking, the warm air from the floor gap, the different floorboards, the torn guest book page, the conversation with the woman at the grocery store. The contact replied that same afternoon. He said the cabin had been temporarily removed from the listing for maintenance, and he apologized for any inconvenience. 4 days later, Ben checked, and the listing was gone entirely. A week after that, he sent a follow-up email asking for a partial refund given the circumstances. The contact replied once more. He said the back bedroom had been added to the cabin by a previous owner without a permit, and that the paperwork on it was complicated, and that he was sorry for any confusion about the listing. He did not address the breathing. He did not address the knocking. He did not address the warm air. The listing never came back. Carla still has the photo of the torn guest book page on her phone. She has read the visible text so many times she has it memorized. She has tried to reconstruct what the missing half of each side might have said, what the door was that they had not opened in the morning, whether it was the back bedroom door or the exterior door to the back porch or something else entirely. She has not been able to work it out. The sentence ends and the page tears and there is no more. They stay in hotels now. Glass and steel and city noise and rooms on upper floors with corridors outside and neighbors on both sides. Carla said she slept fine in hotels before that weekend, and she sleeps fine in them now. She does not sleep fine in quiet places with wood stoves and old floors and rooms that nobody mentions. She does not expect she ever will again. The next account comes from a single afternoon in a small mountain town in Virginia, and it is one of the shortest in this collection. It is also the one that most people find hardest to dismiss because the fear in it is not something that happened to the person telling it. It is something a stranger already knew. Daniel had been hiking alone for 3 days when he stopped in the town. It was not much of a town. A post office, a diner, a motel with 8 rooms, a gas station at the edge of the main road, and a handful of houses set back from the street behind yards that had gone mostly to garden and woodpile. The kind of place that had probably been larger once, when there was a mill or a mine operation nearby, and had settled into its current size after that economy left and stayed that way, because the people who remained had reasons to stay. Daniel liked towns like this. He was 27 and between things, between a job he had left and a plan he had not yet made, and he had taken 2 weeks to walk trails in the Virginia mountains because it was cheaper than therapy and more honest, he thought, about what he actually needed. He had found the Ridge Trail on a hiking app 2 days earlier. It had good reviews, mostly. The photos showed a clear path through mature hardwoods, a rocky section around mile 2 that looked like good scrambling, and views from the upper ridge that justified the climb. The reviews averaged 4 stars. The most recent one was from 3 years ago, but Daniel had not paid attention to that. He was looking at the photos. He hiked it that morning, starting before 7 to get the upper ridge before the clouds built in the afternoon. The trail was in good shape. The markers were clear. The scrambling section at mile 2 was as good as the photos suggested, and he took his time on it, enjoying the cold air and the absence of anyone else on the trail. By mile 4, he was on the upper ridge with views in both directions, and nothing above him but sky. That was where he noticed the trees. On the east side of the trail, starting at a point he would later estimate was about 50 yards past the mile 4 marker. Every tree had a strip of bark removed at roughly shoulder height. Not scraped, not damaged, removed cleanly. A strip maybe 2 inches wide and 8 to 10 inches long, cut at consistent angles on both the top and bottom edges. Old cuts, the exposed wood beneath them weathered gray. They had been done a long time ago. They were evenly spaced, one tree after another, for as far as he could see down the trail, which in that section was a good quarter-mile before the path curved back into the woods. He stopped and looked at them. He took a photo with his phone. He thought about it for a few minutes, running through explanations. Survey markers, though these didn't match any survey notation he knew. Forestry marking, though the pattern was wrong for any standard system. Some kind of research project maybe, marking trees for study. Trail maintenance marking, though they were on the wrong side of the trees for that purpose. He could not land on any explanation that fit the spacing and the consistency and the age of the cuts. He kept walking. By the time he reached the trailhead, he had mostly filed it away as something with a practical explanation he did not have enough specialized knowledge to identify. The diner was the only option for dinner in town, and he was there by 6, still in his hiking clothes, boots leaving faint dusty prints on the linoleum. The place had 4 tables and a counter with 6 stools, a pie case with 2 kinds of pie under a glass dome, and a smell of coffee and fried food that had soaked into every surface over what was probably decades. A woman who was maybe 60 was the only staff visible. She moved efficiently behind the counter, refilling without being asked, bringing food on a timeline that suggested long practice. Not particularly warm, but not unfriendly either. The kind of professional ease that comes from doing the same job well for a long time. Daniel ate, and it was good. He had the soup and a sandwich and 2 cups of coffee and a slice of the pie, which was better than the soup and the sandwich. He was comfortable in the way you get comfortable after a long day outside, loose-limbed and easy. And he talked a little because the diner was quiet and talking felt natural. He mentioned the trail. He said he had done the ridge trail that morning, and it had been a good hike. He said the upper section had great views. He said there was one thing he hadn't been able to figure out: the stripped trees on the east side of the trail above mile 4. He took out his phone and pulled up the photo and held it across the counter. The woman looked at it. She set down the coffee pot she was holding. She looked at the photo for what Daniel estimated was about 10 seconds. Then she looked at him and asked him one question. She said, "Did you whistle up there?" Daniel said yes. He said he sometimes whistled when he hiked alone. It was a habit. He did it without thinking about it. She picked up the coffee pot. She went into the kitchen. She did not come back out for 15 minutes. When she returned, she refilled his coffee without looking at him, tore the check off her pad, and placed it face down on the counter beside his plate. She did not speak again. When Daniel finished and put on his jacket and said goodnight on his way out the door, she did not look up from the counter she was wiping. He walked back to the motel in the dark, the main street quiet, his boots loud on the sidewalk. He was trying to understand what had just happened. The question she had asked was specific. Not, "What are those marks?" Not, "Have you been up there before?" Not, "Do you know what made those?" "Did you whistle?" As if the marks and the whistling were connected. As if the question answered something she needed to know, and the answer had told her something she did not want to know. He got back to his room and sat on the edge of the bed and opened the hiking app. He went to the trail page and scrolled to the reviews. He had looked at this page 2 days ago when he was planning the hike. He had seen 4-star reviews with good photos and had not paid much attention to the dates. He paid attention to the dates now. The most recent review was 3 years and 2 months ago. Before that, reviews came regularly, every few weeks, the normal rhythm of a popular trail in hiking season. Then they stopped. The trail was still listed as open. The trail status had not changed, but in 3 years and 2 months, not one person had left a review. He scrolled down through the older reviews looking for any mention of the stripped trees and found nothing. People talked about the views, the scrambling section, the length, the difficulty rating. Nobody mentioned anything unusual above mile 4. He went to the photos section and scrolled through. Most were what you would expect: trail shots, view shots, the scrambling section. Then he found one from 4 years ago. A hiker had photographed the upper ridge section of the trail, a wide shot that took in both sides of the path and the view beyond. In the photo, the east side of the trail was visible. The stripped trees were there, the same marks he had photographed that morning, the same spacing, the same gray-weathered cuts. And at the far end of the marked section, where the trail curved into the woods, something was standing. It was at the edge of the photo's resolution, blurred by distance and the wide angle of the shot. It could have been a hiker in dark clothing who had stopped to look at the view. It was roughly the right height for a person. It was roughly the right shape, standing upright, facing the trail. But the way it was positioned was slightly wrong. Not facing the camera, not facing away, but turned at an angle that did not correspond to anything natural, as if it had been in the middle of a movement and then stopped. And it was standing at the very edge of the marked section, right where the last stripped tree stood before the trail curved away. The photo had 47 likes. It had 0 comments. The hiker who had posted it had no other activity on the app. No other photos, no other reviews, no other check-ins. The account existed for that one photo and nothing else. Daniel sat on the motel bed with the cheap floral bedspread and the weak lamp, and looked at that photo for a long time. He thought about the woman's question. He thought about the fact that she had asked it before she saw the fear on his face, before she knew how he would respond, before she had any way of knowing that he had or hadn't whistled. She had looked at the photo, and the first thing she needed to know was whether he had whistled. He thought about what that implied, that the marks and the whistling were connected, that what the marks meant was something she understood and he did not, that his answer had confirmed something she was hoping to be wrong about. She had not told him what to do. She had not told him to leave, or to stay indoors, or to not go back to the trail. She had just stopped talking to him, as if what he had told her placed him in a category of person she did not know how to help. He checked out the next morning before the diner opened. He had planned to hike a second trail, a different ridge, further north. He did not hike it. He packed his car and drove off the mountain with the radio on, something loud, and he did not turn it off until he was on the interstate and the mountains were behind him. He does not hike alone anymore. He has told this story several times, and every person he has told it to asks the same question at the end. They ask what the marks on the trees meant. He tells them he does not know. He tells them the waitress never answered that. He tells them she never answered anything else either, and that he has thought about that more than he has thought about the marks, or the photo, or the figure at the end of the row of trees. He thought about her face when she looked at the photo, before she asked the question. The way her expression did not change, did not register surprise or curiosity, registered something more like confirmation, like she had seen the photo before, or something very much like it, and had been waiting without knowing it for someone to show it to her again. He does not whistle anymore, on a trail or anywhere else. He did not make a conscious decision about it. He just stopped, the way you stop doing something when the habit gets tangled up with a memory you cannot resolve. The trail is still listed as open on the app. 3 years and counting with no new reviews. The figure in the old photo is still there, at the edge of the frame, at the edge of the marked section, standing at an angle that does not quite make sense. Nobody has commented on it. The next account is from a park ranger, and it is the one that troubled me most when I first encountered it, because rangers are not people who scare easily. They are trained for isolation, for emergencies, for encounters with animals and unstable people and extreme weather. They understand what forests do and do not do. When something violates what a ranger knows to be true about a place, that violation carries a weight that a civilian account does not. Garrett worked a national forest district in West Virginia for 3 years. He transferred out in the spring following the events he described. He told this account to one person, a friend in the service, who passed it to us with Garrett's knowledge and on the condition that the district and trail designations be altered. We have honored that condition. Garrett described himself as a practical person. He said this not defensively, not as a disclaimer, but as context. He had grown up in a small city, studied natural resources in college, spent 2 years doing trail maintenance work before he got his ranger position, and had been working the West Virginia district for 3 years by the time the incident occurred. He had dealt with lost hikers, illegal campsites, a bear that kept returning to a picnic area, 2 vehicle accidents on service roads, and a situation involving a man living in a homemade structure on federal land that had taken several weeks to resolve peacefully. None of these things had shaken him in any lasting way. They were the work. He described himself as someone who was mostly afraid of paper cuts and budget meetings. He said this with enough self-awareness that his friend believed him, and his friend's account of Garrett's manner in telling the story is itself part of what makes the account credible. He was not a person who reached for dramatic explanations. He was a person who reached for the most boring explanation available, and was satisfied with it until the boring explanation stopped being available. It was a late September evening shift. The summer had been wet, and he had been working through a backlog of trail damage assessment reports, cataloging washouts and erosion points and bridge conditions across the district, cross-referencing with maintenance request forms that would eventually work their way through the budget process and result in repairs sometime in the following fiscal year, maybe. He was parked at a gravel turnout on a service road with a good view of the main ridge, eating a sandwich from a cooler, watching the sun drop behind the tree line. The radio was clipped to his vest. Routine traffic on the district channel, a weather check, a check-in from another ranger 12 miles south. The comfortable noise of a shift winding toward its end. The secondary channel was an older frequency that the district used to monitor mostly out of habit. It had been the primary channel years ago, before a system upgrade, and some of the older rangers still used it occasionally for informal communication. Garrett kept it open because Fulton, the most senior ranger in the district, sometimes called on it when he was in areas where the newer system had dead spots. It was not a channel anyone outside the service would have reason to use. A voice came through on the secondary channel at 6:42 in the evening. Male voice, calm, but with something underneath the calm that Garrett would later describe as strain. The kind of voice that is working to stay even. It said the speaker was on Trail 9, had separated from his group, had no GPS signal, and was requesting a ranger response. Garrett finished his sandwich before he responded, which is itself a measure of how routine the call seemed in that first moment. Lost hikers called for help. It happened. Trail 9 had been a popular route before the bridge went out, and some people still tried it, despite the closure signs. He keyed his radio and said he was responding and asked for more detail on the caller's location. Then he drove toward the Trail 9 gate. Trail 9 had been closed since the previous October. A storm had taken out the footbridge at mile 3, collapsing one side entirely, and leaving the other side hanging at an angle over a creek that ran high and fast for most of the year. The damage assessment had put the repair cost above the district's annual maintenance budget, the request had gone up the chain, and in the meantime the trail had been signed and barricaded at the gate with a district padlock. The signs were clear. The barriers were physical. There was no ambiguity about the closure. There was no vehicle at the gate. He checked before he got out of the truck. The area around the gate was muddy from recent rain, and he could see his own tire tracks pulling in and no others. He took his flashlight and walked the gate perimeter. The padlock was intact. The chain was on. The barriers on either side of the gate were in place. He walked the mud for 20 feet in both directions along the fence line. No boot prints. No sign that anyone had been through the gate recently. He got back in the truck and keyed the secondary channel. The voice responded immediately. It said it had been out there since morning, that it was getting dark, that it was not sure how far it had come from the trailhead. Garrett asked it to describe what it could see around it. Specific landmarks, rock formations, trail features. The voice described a rock formation after a short pause. It described the formation accurately, the layered sandstone shelf above the trail, the way it overhung the path on the left side. Garrett knew that formation. He had assessed it during a survey 2 years earlier. It was at Mile 5. Mile 5 was past the destroyed bridge at Mile 3. The section of trail where the voice was describing itself standing was physically inaccessible from the gate end of the trail, without crossing a bridge that no longer existed. To reach Mile 5 from the gate, you would need to cross a creek that ran chest-high and fast in September over a washed-out concrete pad. Nobody had done that. Nobody could have done that without equipment and assistance, and a very specific reason. Garrett sat with the radio in his hand for a moment. Then he keyed it and asked the voice for a name. Static. A long burst of it, the kind that sounds almost intentional, and then through the static, a different voice. A woman's voice. Clear and close, the way a voice sounds when the transmission is strong. 2 words. A first name and a last initial. The channel went dead. Garrett sat in the truck with the radio in his hand, and the gate in his headlights, and the ridge darkening fast behind the tree line, and he was very still for a long time. He knew the name. Every ranger in the district knew the name. A hiker had gone missing on Trail 9 14 months earlier. A solo hiker who had signed the trail register at the trailhead on a Tuesday morning and had not been seen again. The search had gone on for 11 days. They had found a boot, one boot, on the bank of the creek at Mile 3, and nothing else. The case was still technically open. The first name and the last initial the woman's voice had said on the secondary channel were the missing hiker's first name and last initial. Garrett drove back to the ranger station. He pulled the radio log for that shift, the automated record of all transmissions on all channels. The secondary channel showed no recorded transmission at 6:42. The log had entries before and after that time, routine traffic, nothing unusual. But at 6:42 there was a blank line. Not an error notation, not a corrupted entry, not a gap in the timestamp sequence. A blank line, as if the system had registered that a transmission occurred at that moment and then had nothing to put in the record for it. He sat at the station desk and looked at that blank line for a while. Then he wrote up a request for an emergency trail check and sent it to his district supervisor for morning approval. He drove home. He did not sleep. He was back at the Trail 9 gate at 4 in the morning. He sat in the truck with the engine off and the radio on, both channels, the primary and the secondary. The gate was the same. The mud was the same. The padlock was the same. He sat there for the better part of an hour in the dark with his thermos and the radio static and the sound of the wind in the ridge trees above the trail. At 4:47 in the morning, he heard a whistle. It came from inside the trail closure, from somewhere in the dark, past the gate, on the trail side. 3 short bursts and 1 long. He knew that pattern. Every ranger on the search team had known that pattern. It was the signal they had used during the 11-day search for the missing hiker, the call and response system the team had established to communicate across the hollow when radio reception was poor. 3 short and 1 long had meant a ranger checking in from a search position. It was not a universal signal. It was specific to that search, established in a briefing on the first morning, used only by people who had been in that briefing room. The signal came twice, in the exact rhythm, and then stopped. Garrett did not respond. He sat in the truck and did not move, and the trail beyond the gate was silent after that, until the birds started up around 5:30, and the ridge began to lighten. He told Fulton about it at the station later that morning. Fulton was the oldest ranger in the district, 22 years on that land. A man who knew the trails the way Ray knew his hunting ridge, from the inside, from having walked every section of them in every season and condition. Fulton listened to the whole account without interrupting. When Garrett finished, Fulton was quiet for a moment. Then he said that trail was wrong before it was closed. Garrett asked what he meant. Fulton said a trail crew had reported equipment moved overnight on that section, on 3 separate occasions, 3 different summers. Tools left at a work site and found rearranged in the morning. Not stolen, rearranged. He said the crew had written it up, and the district had attributed it to animals or to other hikers using the trail at night. He said this without any particular emphasis, just as a fact he had been carrying around. Then he picked up his coffee and left the room. The morning trail check was Garrett and a younger ranger named Yates. They went in from the gate with documentation equipment and first aid gear, following protocol for an emergency welfare check, even though Garrett already knew what they would and would not find. The bridge at mile 3 was exactly as it had been in every previous assessment. 1 side down, 1 side hanging. The creek below running fast and brown from recent rain. Impassable. The section beyond mile 3 was inaccessible. They searched everything accessible from the gate to mile 3. At mile 2, on a flat rock beside the trail that Garrett had passed 100 times, there was a water bottle. It was standing upright. Not on its side, not wedged between rocks, not placed the way you place something when you are setting it down for a moment. Standing upright on the flat center of the rock, the way you place something deliberately, the way you place something you want to be found. The color was distinctive, an unusual dark teal that Garrett recognized from the search photographs. The missing hiker's family had identified the bottle in the photographs as belonging to their family member. The lid was on. There was no mud on it, no moss, no weathering of any kind. It looked like it had been placed there recently. The missing hiker had been gone for 14 months. They documented it and bagged it and called it in. The family was notified. The official response from the district, after consultation with the relevant agencies, was that the bottle had likely been transported to that location by an animal, or had washed downstream from the mile 3 area during high water and come to rest on the rock. Garrett listened to this explanation and did not argue with it in any official capacity, but he had measured the distance from the flood zone to mile 2. He had calculated the water levels from the season's precipitation records. He had thought about the physics of a bottle washing downstream and coming to rest standing upright on the center of a flat rock. None of it worked, not even close, and the bottle had been standing upright. That detail was the one he kept coming back to. Everything else had an explanation you could stretch to fit if you were willing to stretch far enough. The bottle, standing upright on its own base on the center of a flat rock, after allegedly washing downstream through rough water, did not have an explanation you could stretch to fit. It had been placed there. Someone or something had placed it there, on a section of trail that the district had certified as inaccessible, and had placed it upright, and had done so at some point between the last trail assessment and that morning. The blank line in the radio log, the whistle pattern from the search, the water bottle standing upright at mile 2. Garrett transferred to a different district the following spring. He told us the paperwork was straightforward, and the supervisor approved it without comment. He still monitors the secondary channel when he is on shift, out of a habit he has not been able to break. He has not heard anything on it since that September evening. The water bottle sat in an evidence bag on the station desk for several weeks before it was transferred to storage. Garrett saw it every morning when he came in and every evening when he left. Standing upright in the bag, lid still on, the dark teal color vivid under the fluorescent lights. 14 months after the person who had carried it went into that trail and did not come back out. The morning after Garrett heard the whistle, he wrote 3 things in his personal notebook before he went into the station. Not the official log, not the incident report, his own notebook that he kept in the truck. He wrote the time the whistle had sounded. He wrote the pattern. He wrote one question that he did not answer in the notebook and has not answered since, which was, if the search signal was established in a briefing room 14 months ago and used only by people who were in that room, what was using it now, and what was it trying to say? He closed the notebook and went inside and did his job. That is the part of Garrett's account that his friend emphasized when he passed it to us. Not the radio call, not the water bottle, not the blank log entry. The fact that Garrett went back to work the next morning. That he completed the trail check professionally, documented everything correctly, interfaced with the responding agencies without letting his personal conclusions contaminate the official record. He was a ranger. He did what rangers do. The thing that had happened on Trail 9 was not going to change the way he did his job. At least, not in any way that would show in a report. What it changed was quieter than that. He stopped going out to the Trail 9 gate on his own time. He had been doing that without fully realizing it, driving out there on evenings when his shift ended early, or on days off when he was nearby, checking the gate, checking the mud for prints, sitting in the truck with the secondary channel open. He stopped after the water bottle. He told his friend he decided it was not useful, that whatever information was available at that gate had already been given, and he was not going to get more by sitting there. His friend said he thought it was more than that. His friend thought Garrett had decided that whatever was at that gate was not something he wanted to make a habit of being near. Fulton did not bring up Trail 9 again after the morning conversation. Garrett mentioned it once more, about a week after the trail check, asking if Fulton had any documentation of the equipment incidents the trail crew had reported. Fulton said he did not think anything had been formally written up, that it had been handled informally, noted verbally, and then attributed to animals and left there. He said the trail crew that summer had been a contract crew, not district staff, and most of them were not from the area. He said local people who worked those trails generally knew which sections to be careful on after dark and which to leave alone, and that the contract crews did not always have that knowledge going in. Garrett asked what sections local people considered careful on after dark sections. Fulton looked at him for a moment and then said, Trail 9 and 2 other trails he named, and one service road that Garrett knew, and then he said he was due for an inspection out on the east boundary and he left. That was the end of the conversation, and as far as Garrett knows, the end of any official acknowledgement within the district that anything unusual had ever occurred on Trail 9. He transferred in April. The new district was 3 counties west, lower elevation, different terrain, different culture. He took the position without a strong reason beyond wanting to be somewhere else, which is a reason that his supervisor apparently found sufficient given that Garrett's record was good and his request was processed without pushback. He drove to the new district on a Monday morning with his gear and his truck and his notebook. He has not driven past the Trail 9 gate since. What he has done, in the time since, is think about the radio log, the blank line at 6:42. Not the transmission itself, not the voices, not the name that the woman's voice had said. The blank line. Because the blank line meant the system knew something had happened at that timestamp. The system had registered an event and had either failed to record its content or had recorded content that was subsequently absent. In Garrett's experience with that logging system, neither of those things had happened before on any other shift. The system logged everything. Garbled transmissions logged as garbled. Dead air logged as dead air. There was no mechanism he knew of by which the system would register transmission and then produce a blank entry. Someone at the district office had looked at that log after the incident. A supervisor or a technician. Someone whose job it was to review logs when an incident report was filed. They had seen the blank line. Nobody had ever said anything to Garrett about it. Not an inquiry, not a technical explanation, not an acknowledgement that it was unusual. The blank line had simply been there, and then the matter had moved on, and the water bottle had gone to storage, and Garrett had transferred west, and Trail 9 was still closed with a district padlock on the gate. He still monitors the secondary channel. He said he does not expect to hear anything on it. He does not know exactly why he keeps monitoring it. He said it might be the same reason people check a door twice after they have already locked it. Not because they think the door is open, just because the cost of not checking feels higher than it used to. The water bottle is in a storage room at the district station. Garrett does not know exactly which shelf. He knows the evidence bag will have the case number on it, and the date and the location where it was found. He knows the lid is still on it. He knows it is the right color. He has not gone back to see it and does not plan to. The search case is technically still open. There are no active leads. The family has not been given a final answer about what happened to their family member on Trail 9. The district's official position is that the terrain and conditions made a full recovery impossible, and that the investigation remains ongoing in a formal sense. In a practical sense, it has not been actively worked in over a year. The missing hiker went into that trail on a Tuesday morning with a signed register entry and a distinctive dark teal water bottle and was not seen again. 14 months later, the water bottle was standing upright on a rock at mile 2, clean and undamaged, on a section of trail that no person should have been able to access. Nobody has explained that to Garrett's satisfaction. Nobody has tried very hard. The next account is brief, and it comes from a woman who has walked the same land her entire life. She is not someone who frightens easily. She knows the difference between what land sounds like and what it does not sound like. She has made that distinction correctly for over 50 years. What she heard on a clear late summer morning on her family's property at the Kentucky and Tennessee border is something she has told only to her daughter, and her daughter told it to us on the condition that her mother's name not be used in full. We have honored that. We are using only her first name. Her name is May, and the rule she followed that morning is older than she is. May had walked that boundary fence so many times she could tell you which posts were original and which had been replaced and approximately when, based on the wood and the wire and the way the staples had rusted. 80 acres of family farmland on the Kentucky and Tennessee border, rolling in the upper sections and dropping into a series of hollows toward the south, with a creek running along the lower boundary that had been there, as far as anyone in her family knew, longer than anyone in her family had been there to know it. She had packed a lunch and her old canvas bag with the fencing pliers and a handful of staples and some extra wire, because her son had called 2 days earlier and said he had driven the fence line from the road and thought there was a section down somewhere near the lower creek crossing. He had not been able to get close enough to see it clearly from the truck, but it looked like 2 or 3 posts were leaning, and maybe some wire down. May told him she would check it. She did not need him to come with her. She had been walking that fence line since she was a girl. It was a clear morning in late August, the kind of clear that comes after a week of humidity finally breaks, the air dry enough to smell the difference. Good boots, thermos of coffee, the canvas bag over one shoulder. She took the path she always took, along the upper field and down through the woodlot, and out onto the lower section where the land flattened before the creek. The creek was running low, the way it always ran in late summer, and the stepping stones she had used for 40 years were well above the water line. Easy crossing, dry stones, not even any mud on the far bank to speak of. She crossed and walked toward the fence line. The lower section of fence ran along the far bank of the creek and then turned south, following the property boundary into the hollow. That hollow dropped steeply on the far side, the kind of slope that was never farmed or logged because there was no practical way to work it, thickly wooded and dark even on a clear morning, the trees close enough together that the light came through in narrow columns. Her family had always called it the South Hollow, not with any particular feeling attached to it, just as a geographic designation, the way you name parts of land you know well. She was about 20 yards from the fence line, scanning the posts for the leaning ones her son had described, when she heard the child. It was crying, not screaming, not in acute distress, the quiet, rhythmic crying of a child who is tired and lost, and has been crying long enough that the crying has become almost mechanical, almost a comfort in itself. It was coming from the direction of the South Hollow, from the far side of the fence line, somewhere in the trees below the slope. May stopped walking. She stood still and listened for a moment. The sound was clear. There was no ambiguity about what it was. She looked around the far bank and saw nothing. She called out, "Hello," loudly enough to carry into the trees. The crying stopped the instant her voice landed. Not faded, stopped, clean and immediate, the way a recording stops when someone hits the button. May stood still. She was 52 years old, and she had been on that land her entire life. She was not a woman who startled easily or reached for frightening explanations when plain ones were available. She thought about what a child would be doing on the far side of her fence line in the South Hollow on a Wednesday morning, and she could not construct a scenario that made straightforward sense. The nearest house with children in it was 7 miles by road. The hollow had no trail, no path, no reason for anyone to be in it. The hollow dropped so steeply that getting into it required either knowing exactly where you were going or being someone without the sense to realize the terrain was dangerous. She thought about her mother's voice. Her mother had told her the rule when May was young enough that she could not pin down exactly when the telling happened. It was one of those things she had always known, the way she had always known not to cross the electric fence or to watch her step near the creek after rain. Her mother had said, "If you hear a child crying in the hollow on the far side of the creek, you do not cross the fence line to find it. You come home." Her mother had called it the oldest rule on this land and had not explained it further, and May had not asked for an explanation because she was young enough that she had not thought to ask. And by the time she was old enough to think the question was worth asking, her mother was gone. She had not thought about that rule in years. She was thinking about it now. She turned and walked back toward the stepping stones. The crying began again. It was to her right this time. Still on the far side of the fence, still in the trees, but to her right rather than ahead of her, which meant it had moved. She had been walking for maybe 30 seconds. Whatever was making the sound had covered the same distance along the fence line in the same time she had covered on the near side, moving parallel to her, keeping pace. She did not stop walking. She kept her eyes on the stepping stones, and she did not look toward the fence. The crying was the same sound it had been the first time. The same tired rhythmic quality, the same pitch and pace. It did not change as she walked, did not get louder or softer, just maintained the same steady register, moving with her along the fence line, staying on the far side. She was 10 feet from the stepping stones when the voice said, "Wait." One word, clearly in the voice of a child. The flat vowels of the county, the specific regional sound she had heard her whole life, the accent of the hollow and the ridge. Not a generic child's voice. A voice that sounded like it came from here, from this land, from someone who had grown up with the same sounds around them that May had grown up with. It said, "Wait," and it said it the way a child says a word when it is the most important word it knows. She stepped onto the first stone. She stepped onto the second. She crossed the creek without looking back, and she walked up the path toward the wood lot and the upper field, and did not stop until she reached the farmhouse. Her boots were dry. The crossing had been easy. She had not run. She had walked at the same pace she had been walking the whole morning, which she was fairly certain was important, though she could not have explained why. She called her son from the farmhouse phone. He came out that afternoon and they walked the fence line together from the near side, from the creek bank, staying on the family side of the fence. The wire her son had thought was down was fine. Every post was solid. There was no damage anywhere on that lower section. Nothing that would have been visible from the road or anywhere else. The fence was in better shape than some of the upper sections that May maintained regularly. They did not discuss why they were checking from the near side only. Her son did not suggest crossing the creek. May did not suggest it either. They walked the line, confirmed the fence was intact, and went back to the farmhouse where May made lunch, and they ate and talked about other things. She has not told her son what she heard. She does not see the point in telling him, because the rule that matters is the one she already knows, and the rule is not something she learned from explaining. It is something she learned from being told, simply, by someone who knew the land and knew what it asked of the people who lived on it. Her son is a practical man. He would want to understand the mechanism. She does not know the mechanism. She only knows the rule. She told her daughter. Her daughter, who is 31 and lives in another state and visits when she can, listened to the account without interrupting. When Mai finished, her daughter was quiet for a moment. Then she said that their grandmother had told her the same rule. Not in the context of a story, not as a warning attached to an incident. Just as a rule, the way you tell a child a rule, because the child needs to know it, and the telling is its own sufficient reason. May had not known her mother had told her daughter the rule. She had assumed it had passed only to her, that she was the last person in the family who carried it. Learning that her daughter knew it without having needed to learn it from an experience changed something in the way she thought about the rule. She had always understood it as practical, as folk wisdom, as the kind of thing that gets passed down because some long-ago version of it had been useful. But the fact that it had been passed independently to her daughter, outside of any incident, suggested it was something the family had decided needed to be carried forward, regardless of whether anyone had occasion to use it. The rule was not a story. It was not a warning attached to an event. It was simply a rule, passed down through women on that land across at least 3 generations that May could account for, and possibly more that she could not. She does not cross the creek alone anymore. She walks the near side of the fence when she needs to check that section, which she does twice a year. The far side looks the same every time. The south hollow drops away below the fence line into the dark trees, the same as it always has. She has not heard the sound again, She does not expect that means it is gone. She expects it means she has not given it a reason to start. The question May's daughter asked us, when she was done telling the account, was whether we had heard similar rules from other families in that region. We told her we had, variations on the same instruction, from different hollows in different counties, some attached to creeks and some attached to tree lines and some attached to specific hours of the day or night. We told her the specifics varied, but the core was consistent. Do not answer, do not cross, do not follow. She said her grandmother had said the oldest rule on this land. She wanted to know how old. We do not know. Nobody we have spoken to knows. The rule is older than the people carrying it, which may be the only answer available. The next account is different from everything that has come before it. It is not a single night's experience or a single morning's encounter. It is a pattern that developed over 6 weeks, documented by a man who was trained to document things carefully, who tried for a long time to find an explanation that fit his professional understanding of the world, and who retired earlier than he had planned because he could not find one. His name is Lyle. He worked a Kentucky district for 28 years. He submitted this account to a small regional outdoor publication that chose not to run it. The editor told him it was not sufficiently verifiable. Lyle's wife has a different theory about why it did not run, but she has kept that theory to herself because Lyle does not like to talk about it. We have the original typed account. What follows is drawn directly from it. Lyle typed his account on a machine, not a computer. His wife told us this when she passed the document along, said he had kept the typewriter from his father and used it for things he considered important enough to put on paper properly. The account was 7 pages, single-spaced, with handwritten corrections in the margins where he had changed a word or added a detail he had forgotten on the first pass. It read the way Lyle apparently spoke, according to his wife. Careful, unhurried, not reaching for effect. He began by describing the coal road. It ran along the southern section of his district, a 9-mile stretch of packed gravel and hard dirt that followed a ridgeline before dropping down into a hollow at the eastern end. The road had been built by a coal company in the 1950s for access to extraction operations in the hollow, and when those operations ended, the road had been absorbed into the district's service infrastructure, used occasionally by hunters and more occasionally by district vehicles doing boundary checks and fire monitoring. It was not a road that saw much traffic. On most of Lyle's weekly circuits, it was empty the entire 9 miles, which was normal and expected, and not a thing he had ever given any thought to. The road had one feature that made it slightly less unremarkable than the rest of the service roads in his circuit, which was the fire tower at mile 6. It was an old tower, built in the 1930s, staffed through the 1960s, and then automated and then decommissioned when aircraft and satellite monitoring made ground towers less necessary. The cab at the top had been secured with a padlock and left, the stairs still intact, the structure maintained for historical interest, and because removing it cost more than leaving it standing. Lyle had climbed it twice in 28 years, once to check the cab condition for a facilities report, and once on a slow afternoon because the view from the catwalk was one of the better views in the district, and he had wanted to see it again. Otherwise, he drove past it once a week on his circuit and gave it no more attention than any other landmark. He drove the coal road on a Tuesday night in early November when the first encounter happened. The night was dry and cold, no precipitation, good visibility. He had the district radio on and the spotlight mounted on the truck's roof and the heater running because the temperature had dropped below freezing after dark. He was about 4 miles into the road when his headlights picked up the figure. It was standing in the gravel shoulder on the right side of the road, just past the mile 4 marker. Male figure, as best he could determine, average height, standing with its arms at its sides and its face turned uphill, toward the direction of the fire tower 2 miles further along the road. It was not moving. It was not doing anything. It was simply standing there in the gravel shoulder of a service road in a remote Kentucky district at 9:30 in the evening, looking uphill. Lyle stopped the truck and hit the spotlight. The figure did not react. Not a flinch, not a turn of the head, not a step in any direction. The spotlight was bright and close, the kind of light that makes you raise your hand to shield your eyes if you are a person standing in it. The figure did not raise its hand. It stood in the spotlight the same way it had stood in the headlights, with its arms at its sides and its face turned toward the fire tower. Lyle got out of the truck and called out. He announced himself as a district ranger and asked if the person needed assistance. The figure was gone. Not gone after he called out. Gone as he was calling out, between one word and the next, without any sound of movement, without any direction of departure visible in the spotlight beam. He was looking directly at it when it ceased to be there. The spotlight showed the gravel shoulder, the tree line beyond, the mile 4 marker post. Nothing else. He walked the shoulder with his flashlight. He walked it in both directions from where the figure had been standing, a good 40 feet each way. The gravel and the packed dirt were dry and held impressions reasonably well. He found no boot prints, no disturbance in the surface, no broken branches in the brush at the tree line. No indication that any person had been standing in that spot or had moved through that spot in either direction. He filed no report. He got back in the truck and finished the circuit. He told himself it was a trick of light, a fatigue effect, something his headlights had done with the shadows and the tree line on a cold November night. He had been on shift for 7 hours by that point. It was not unreasonable to attribute a visual anomaly to tiredness. He was a practical man, and practical men attribute anomalies to the most boring explanation available, and tiredness was the most boring explanation available. 3 weeks later, on the same night of the week, he drove the coal road again as part of his standard circuit. He came around the long curve before mile 4 with his headlights on full beam and the spotlight off, running the road the way he always ran it. His thermos was in the cup holder. The radio was on the district channel. He was thinking about a facilities report he needed to finish before Friday. The figure was at mile 4, same position, same arms at sides, same face turned uphill toward the tower. Lyle recognized it before his brain had fully processed that he was seeing it a second time. The way you recognize a place you have been before, even when you cannot immediately name it. He stopped the truck. He did not get out this time. He hit the spotlight and he sat in the truck and he watched it. 6 minutes. He timed it on the dashboard clock. 6 minutes of sitting in the truck with the spotlight on the figure at mile 4, watching it stand in the gravel shoulder with its arms at its sides and its face turned toward the fire tower 2 miles up the road. He could see it clearly in the spotlight. Average height, dark clothing, or what appeared to be dark clothing. Arms straight down. The angle of the face was consistent with looking uphill, not at him, not at the truck, not at the spotlight. Uphill, toward the tower. It did not move. It did not breathe visibly in the cold air. Lyle could see his own breath condensing on the inside of the windshield. The figure produced nothing. After 6 minutes, he put the truck in drive and moved forward slowly, at walking pace, watching the figure as he approached it. When the truck reached the point where the figure was standing, there was nothing there. Not nothing, as in the figure had stepped aside. Nothing, as in the space was empty. The gravel was empty. The shoulder was empty. He stopped the truck and sat with the driver's window down and listened. No footsteps, no brush moving, No sound of any kind from the tree line. He drove the rest of the circuit without the radio on. Back at the station, he checked the authorization logs for the coal road. No authorized personnel were scheduled for that road on that night or the surrounding nights. He pulled the hunting permit records for the district. Nobody had a permitted camp or stand anywhere near Mile 4 on the coal road. He thought about asking his supervisor directly, something along the lines of, "Has anyone reported any issues near the Mile 4 marker on the South Coal Road?" and decided to approach it more carefully. He brought it up casually in conversation, mentioned he had seen what looked like someone on the road near Mile 4 on 2 separate nights, asked if the supervisor knew of any reason someone would be out there. The supervisor changed the subject. Lyle described this in his typed account with some precision. He wrote that the supervisor did not say he did not know, did not say he would look into it, did not say it was probably a local hunter. He changed the subject, moved immediately to a different topic without acknowledging the question, in the practiced way of someone who has learned through long experience how to redirect a conversation without appearing to redirect it. Lyle had seen that move before, in meetings and in difficult conversations with the public, and in situations where a supervisor needed to manage what information was available to staff. He recognized it for what it was. He did not bring it up again officially. On the third Tuesday, 6 weeks after the first encounter, Lyle drove the coal road with his camera on the seat beside him. It was a 35mm film camera, a practical model he used for documenting trail conditions and infrastructure damage. He had loaded a fresh roll of film before leaving the station. He had also turned the spotlight on before he rounded the curve at Mile 4, so that the light was already reaching the shoulder when he came around the bend. The figure was already there, already standing, already facing the tower. Lyle stopped the truck at a distance. He raised the camera and photographed through the windshield, the glass slightly fogging at the edges from the cab heat but clear enough in the center. He took 3 photographs in sequence, advancing the film between each one, keeping the truck stopped and the spotlight on the figure the entire time. The figure did not react to the camera any more than it had reacted to the spotlight or to his voice on the first night. It stood in the gravel shoulder with its arms at its sides and its face turned uphill, and it was there. And then, when Lyle looked up from the viewfinder after the third shot, it was not. He sat in the truck for a while after that. Then he finished the circuit and went home. The coal road smelled of dust and cold, and something underneath both of those, something mineral and old that Lyle associated with the hollow at the eastern end of the road, where the extraction operations had been, where the shafts went down. He had always noticed that smell on the eastern stretch of the road and had never thought much about it. He thought about it that night on the drive home. He did not know why. The photographs came back from the developer 10 days later. Lyle picked them up at the pharmacy in town that did film processing, a small envelope with a number on it that matched his claim ticket. He sat in his truck in the parking lot and went through them. He had shot the whole roll over the previous weeks, trail conditions mostly, a washout on the east boundary road, some infrastructure documentation. The coal road shots were the last 3 on the roll. The first coal road photograph showed the spotlight beam reaching the gravel shoulder at Mile 4 and the tree line beyond and the mile marker post. The shoulder was empty. The second photograph showed the same composition, the same spotlight angle, the same empty shoulder. Lyle looked at these 2 for a moment and then turned to the third. The figure was in the third photograph. It was visible in the spotlight beam, standing in the gravel shoulder in the same position it had occupied on all 3 nights, arms at sides, face angled uphill toward the fire tower. The image was clear enough in the center of the frame, where the windshield glass had been cleanest. Lyle looked at it for a long time in the pharmacy parking lot with the engine off and the November cold coming through the glass. The figure's feet were not on the gravel. He looked at this for a while before he was certain he was seeing it correctly, because it was the kind of detail that the brain resists accepting at first, that it tries to reinterpret as a trick of the light or a problem with the film. But the spotlight beam was hitting the gravel at a consistent angle, and the shadows it cast were consistent throughout the frame except around the figure's feet, where there was light beneath them. A gap of brightness between the soles and the gravel surface that should not have been there if the figure had been standing on the road. The gap was small. He estimated it at approximately 6 inches when he measured it against the known height of the mile marker post in the same frame. The figure was standing 6 inches above the gravel. Lyle put the photographs back in the envelope and put the envelope in his glove box and drove to see a man named Cutter, who had worked the coal mines in that hollow for 30 years before the operations closed, and who still lived in the same house he had always lived in the small community at the base of the ridge below the coal road. Cutter was in his driveway when Lyle pulled up, doing something with the truck engine that required him to have the hood up and both hands involved. He listened to Lyle's description of the figure without stopping what he was doing, which Lyle noted in his account as something he appreciated. Cutter did not make it a bigger moment than it was. He listened the way you listen to a weather report, taking in information, filing it. When Lyle finished, Cutter wiped his hands on a rag and said that road runs over the number 6 shaft. He said it collapsed in 1962, and 11 men were underground when it did. He said they got most of them out and they did not get all of them out, and everybody in that hollow knew which category applied to which man, because everybody in that hollow had known the men. He said the company had sealed the shaft and the community had moved on, the way communities move on when they do not have the option of not moving on. And that was the whole of what he said about it. He went back to the truck engine. Lyle drove home. He did not go back to the coal road at night. He rerouted his weekly circuit the following Tuesday and every Tuesday after that, taking the long way around the eastern boundary that added 40 minutes to his shift and required crossing a culvert that was in poor condition and that he had been meaning to have assessed for repair. He did not submit a route change form because submitting a route change form required a reason, and he did not have a reason he was willing to put on a district form. He drove to the fire tower on a clear afternoon 2 weeks after picking up the photographs. He had been thinking about the figure's face angle, the consistent uphill orientation, the way it had been looking toward the tower on all 3 nights from the same position on the road. He wanted to see what mile 4 looked like from the tower. The tower's stairs were open, the cab padlocked. He climbed to the catwalk level, 1 story below the cab, and looked out over the ridge and the coal road below. The view was good. He could see the road for most of its length, the gravel pale against the darker ground on either side, the hollow dropping away to the east, the ridge running west toward the main district. He found mile 4 without difficulty. He could see the marker post from the catwalk, small but identifiable at that distance, and he could see, in the gravel at that spot, a discoloration. A circular area of darker ground, roughly centered on the location where the figure had stood on all 3 nights. The circle was perhaps 4 feet in diameter. The gravel within it was compressed and darkened compared to the surrounding surface, the way ground looks when something has been standing on it repeatedly, when weight has been applied to the same spot over a period of weeks or months. The discoloration was consistent with that kind of repeated compression. It was not consistent with a single event or a single visitor. Something had been standing at mile 4 on the coal road for long enough to leave a mark in the ground. He climbed back down and drove to the station and sat at his desk and looked at the photograph in the envelope for a while. Then he put it back in the envelope and took the envelope home and put it in a folder in the drawer of his desk at home, between two other folders so it did not stand out. He has never shown it to his district supervisor. He has shown it to his wife, who looked at it once and did not want to look at it again, and to Cutter, who looked at it for a long time without saying anything and then handed it back. That spring, Lyle put in for early retirement. He was 3 years ahead of his planned date. The paperwork went through without issue. He told his wife it was because the editor of the publication had said the account was not verifiable, and he had decided that meant there was nothing useful he could do with it, and if there was nothing useful he could do with it, then he would rather not carry it around in his professional life anymore. His wife listened to this explanation and did not argue with it, but she told us she thought the real reason was simpler. She thought Lyle had decided that 28 years was enough, and that whatever was at mile 4 on that coal road was something he did not want to keep driving past, even in daylight, even on a route he had rerouted away from nights ago. He still drives the road sometimes, during the day, in his own truck, not a district vehicle. He goes slowly when he passes mile 4. He always looks at the gravel shoulder. He has not seen the figure in daylight, not once in the time since he retired. The discolored circle is still there. He checked it last spring and the compressed, darker ground was still visible, the same size, the same shape. He told his wife he did not know what that meant. She told us she did not think he was telling the truth about that she thought he had a clear idea of what it meant and had decided not to say it out loud, which was his right. The fire tower at mile 6 has not been staffed in 12 years. The cab is still padlocked. On clear nights when the conditions are right, you can see the tower's silhouette from the coal road below, the angular geometry of it against the ridge stars, pointing upward from the tree line. Mile 4 is 2 miles south of it. Straight line of sight, unobstructed, clear from one point to the other. Lyle's folder is in the desk drawer at his house. The photograph is inside it. A spotlight beam on a coal road, a figure standing in the gravel shoulder with its arms at its sides and its face turned toward a fire tower that nobody has used in 12 years, and beneath the figure's feet, a gap of light between the soles and the ground. 6 inches, maybe a little more. He has never shown it to anyone official. He does not plan to. The last account in this collection is the one that took me the longest to decide whether to include. Not because I doubted the person telling it. I did not doubt her. I doubted whether including it served any purpose beyond making the person who told it feel exposed in a way she had not fully consented to. I called her twice before I made the decision, and both times she said the same thing. She said she wanted it told because her grandmother deserved to have someone understand what she had been doing all those years. She said her grandmother had kept something in place and nobody had known to thank her for it. And now that the cabin was sold and her grandmother was gone, she wanted someone to know. Her name is Nina, and the cabin has been in her family since 1947. And what she found there last fall is something she is still in the process of understanding. She does not expect to finish understanding it. Nina had not been to the cabin since she was 21. That was 15 years ago, a summer visit with her grandmother that she remembered in the specific, fragmented way you remember places from your younger life, in images rather than sequences. The smell of the wood stove, the particular quality of light through the kitchen window in the morning, the sound the gravel road made under tires when you were coming in, and the way it sounded different somehow when you were leaving. Her grandmother at the kitchen table with her tea, the same brand every morning, the same cup, the same deliberate ritual of it that Nina had found slightly tedious at 21, and now, at 36, understood differently. Her grandmother had passed in the spring, 4 months before Nina drove back to the cabin. The family had handled the legal and financial side of things from a distance. Her mother and her aunt working through the estate paperwork across 2 states, and the cabin had eventually reached the point in the process where it needed to be physically prepared for sale. Inventoried, cleaned, assessed for repairs. Nina had offered to do it because she had the flexibility, and because nobody else wanted to make the drive, and because, if she was being honest with herself, she wanted to see the place one more time before it belonged to someone else. She drove down on a Thursday morning. The highway part of the trip was easy and the county road part was manageable, and the last 12 miles on the gravel road were what she remembered them being: narrow and slow and requiring attention. The road becoming one lane toward the end, where the trees closed in from both sides, and the only way to pass another vehicle would have been for one of you to back up to a wider spot. She did not pass another vehicle. She did not expect to. The cabin was at the end of the road in a clearing that her grandfather had cut out of the hillside in 1947. The same clearing it had always been, the same dimensions, the same tree line on all four sides, at roughly the same distance from the cabin walls. She pulled up and sat in the car for a moment before getting out, looking at the place. It was in reasonable shape. The porch was intact. The roof looked sound from the ground. The windows were all present. It had been empty for 4 months, and it looked like a cabin that had been empty for 4 months. Slightly forlorn in the way that structures get when there is no human warmth inside them, but not damaged, not deteriorated beyond what you would expect. She got the key from her jacket pocket and went to the front door. The door was unlocked. Not ajar, not swinging open. Closed, the knob in the latched position. Everything looking correct from the outside. But when she put the key to the lock, she found it was already in the unlocked position. The cylinder turned, the bolt retracted. She turned the knob, and the door opened without the key doing anything. She stood in the doorway for a moment. She was the only person with a key to that door. Her mother had said this explicitly when she mailed it. Had said the spare had been lost years ago and this was the only one made, and that the lock had been changed after the last time a family member had stayed there, 2 summers before her grandmother died. There was one key and Nina had it, and the door was already unlocked. She thought about her cousin, who sometimes hunted the property in November. He might have a key she did not know about, might have been out there and left through the front door without re-engaging the lock. It was possible. It was the kind of thing that happened with family properties, where the official record of who had access did not always match the practical reality. She accepted this and went inside. The cabin was cold but not damaged. Everything was as she would have expected it. Her grandmother's furniture, her grandmother's things, a thin layer of dust on the flat surfaces that 4 months of sitting empty will produce. The kitchen had its usual arrangement: the small table by the window, the 2 chairs, the shelves with the dishes and the dry goods. On the top shelf, behind a row of canning jars, she found the tin of tea. Her grandmother's brand, the same one she had drunk every morning for as long as Nina could remember. The tin was sealed, the foil pull tab intact, never opened. Her grandmother had been saving it, or had forgotten it, or had put it there for a reason Nina could not know. She read the label before she put it away. She did not know why. It was the same label she had seen hundreds of times. She put it on the shelf and unloaded her groceries and cleaning supplies and started the wood stove, which took 3 attempts to draw properly because the flue had not been opened in months and needed a few minutes of small fire to warm the chimney before it would pull correctly. She changed the propane tank for the kitchen range, a 20-pound cylinder from the porch rack, and checked every room. The cabin had 4 rooms: the kitchen and main room at the front, 2 small bedrooms, and at the back of the second bedroom's hallway, a door that led to a storage room with its own exterior lock, a hasp and padlock arrangement on the outside. She had remembered the storage room from childhood, a utilitarian space with shelves of equipment and preserved food, and the accumulated practical objects of a life lived partly off a remote property. The hasp was open. The padlock was hanging on the hasp loop, unlocked, the shackle not engaged. She did not have a key to that padlock. She had not been given one. She opened the door and looked inside. The storage room was as she remembered it. Shelves of equipment, old tools, canning jars, a few cardboard boxes. Nothing appeared disturbed. She closed the door and went back inside. She told herself it was her cousin, who probably had both a cabin key and a storage room key that nobody had thought to account for in the estate paperwork, and who probably used the storage room for hunting equipment in the fall. It was a reasonable explanation. It was the most boring explanation available, and she accepted it. The first night was almost entirely normal. She made a simple dinner on the propane range and ate at the small kitchen table by the window, looking out at the clearing as the light went. She found her grandmother's handmade quilt in the bedroom closet and unfolded it on the bed. The same quilt she remembered from childhood stays, heavier than modern blankets and warmer. She made tea, not from the sealed tin on the shelf, but from a box she had brought herself, and sat with it on the couch in the main room while the wood stove knocked and ticked as it settled into its heat, and the clearing outside went dark and the tree line became a black wall at the edge of the porch light's reach. She went to bed at 10. She was tired from the drive and the work of opening the cabin up, and she fell asleep without difficulty, the quilt heavy and warm, the wood stove still producing heat in the main room. At 3 a.m, she woke up. She lay still for a moment, the way you lie still in an unfamiliar place when something has woken you and you are trying to identify what. The wood stove. She thought she had forgotten to damper it before bed, and the sound was the stove running too hot. She got up and went to the main room and checked the damper. It was set correctly. She had not forgotten. She stood in the main room and listened. From the hallway that led to the storage room, she could see the storage room door. It was standing open 2 inches. She had closed it before bed. She was certain of that, the same way she was certain about the damper, because she had been careful, because she was alone in a cabin that had already had one unexplained open door today, and she had been paying attention to doors. She went to the hallway and closed the storage room door. She went back to bed. She lay in the dark with the quilt pulled up and listened to the cabin find its nighttime sounds. The stove, the old refrigerator in the kitchen cycling on, the wind coming down off the ridge and moving through the clearing outside. At 4:15 in the morning, she heard something beneath the main room floor. Not the stove, not the refrigerator, not a pipe or a settling beam. A single, slow movement. The sound of something shifting its weight on a surface below the floor, the way you shift when you have been in one position too long and need to change it. One movement, deliberate, unhurried, then nothing. Nina lay in the dark and did not move for a long time after that. The sound had been very clear. It had lasted perhaps 2 seconds. It had come from a specific location below the main room floor, roughly beneath the area between the kitchen table and the wood stove, and it had the quality of something that was aware that the sound it made had been heard and had decided to make no further sound. She did not get up. She lay still and listened, and nothing else happened, and eventually, sometime after 5, she slept again. In the morning, the cabin looked normal. The storage room door was closed. The wood stove had burned down to ash. The clearing outside was pale with early light, and the tree line was just trees, and the gravel road ran straight out through the clearing toward the distant sound of the county road. She made coffee and stood at the kitchen window and looked at the sealed tin of tea on the shelf and thought about calling her mother. She called her mother at 8:30, when the signal was strong enough on the porch to hold a conversation without dropping. She did not mention the storage room door. She did not mention the sound beneath the floor. She asked one question, which she had been turning over since she woke up. Since before she woke up, since sometime in the dark hours between 4:15 and 5, when she had been lying still and listening, and her mind had been working even though she would not have called what it was doing, thinking exactly. She asked whether her grandmother had ever talked about the land before the cabin was built. Her mother was quiet for long enough that Nina checked the signal bar on her phone to make sure the call had not dropped. Then her mother said that the land had been logged in the 1920s, clear-cut mostly, and left to grow back through the 30s and 40s until her grandfather had bought it and built the cabin in 1947. She said the cabin sat on the north end of the property, on the flattest ground, which was why her grandfather had chosen it. She said the south end of the property was a hollow that dropped steeply toward a creek at the bottom, heavily wooded, the slope too severe to have been logged with the equipment available in the 20s, which was why it had been left. She said her grandmother had not allowed anyone to go into that hollow. Nina asked why. Her mother said she did not know. She said she had asked her own mother the same question at some point, years ago, and her mother had said simply that the hollow was not hers to touch and had not elaborated. Her mother had interpreted this as her grandmother's way of expressing respect for land that had not been disturbed, a conservation sensibility common in people who had lived close to the land for a long time. She had accepted this interpretation and had not pushed further. Nina thanked her and ended the call and stood on the porch with the phone in her hand and looked at the tree line on the south side of the clearing, which was the nearest visible edge of the hollow her grandmother had kept closed for as long as anyone in the family could remember. The hollow was not hers to touch. She went inside and spent the morning cleaning. She worked through the kitchen first, the way you work through a recently vacated space, sorting and wiping and deciding what to keep and what to discard, making lists for the realtor of items that would convey with the property and items that would not. She worked steadily and did not think too much. She was good at that, at finding the practical work and staying inside it. In the afternoon, she drove to the nearest town, which was not much of a town, a cluster of buildings at a crossroads 12 miles from the cabin, a gas station and a post office and a handful of houses. She needed some cleaning supplies she had forgotten to bring, and she wanted to ask about a plumber who might be willing to come out and check the pipes before the realtor's visit, because 2 of the kitchen faucets had shown signs of slow drip, and she wanted to know if it was cosmetic or structural. The post office had one person behind the counter, a woman in her 60s who Nina recognized vaguely from childhood visits to the cabin, the way you vaguely recognize people from a place you visited rarely, but consistently enough that faces accumulate. The woman recognized her more precisely, knew her grandmother's name without being told, offered condolences that seemed genuine and not formulaic. Nina asked about the plumber, and the woman gave her a name and a number. Then Nina mentioned the property, mentioned that she was out there getting it ready for sale, and mentioned, without fully knowing why she mentioned it, the hollow to the south. The woman set down what she was holding. She looked at Nina for a moment with an expression that was not quite readable, something between recognition and caution, the expression of someone who is deciding how much of a thing to say. Then she said that Nina's grandmother used to say the hollow was not hers to use and not hers to sell. She said it carefully, the way you repeat a specific phrasing when the specific phrasing matters, when you are trying to convey not just the content but the exact words. She said it as if she had memorized it, as if it were something she had heard enough times that it had settled into her memory as a fixed phrase rather than a paraphrase. Nina asked if she knew what her grandmother meant by it. The woman said she did not. She said Nina's grandmother had said it consistently over the years whenever the property came up in conversation, and that people in the area had understood it as her position on the matter and had not pressed her on it. She said Nina's grandmother had been a woman whose positions on things were clear and did not require explanation, and that people who knew her had learned to take her positions as given. Nina thanked her and drove back to the cabin. She was gone for just under 2 hours. She had the windows down on the drive back because the afternoon had warmed enough to make the car comfortable with the windows down. And she drove the 12 miles of county road and then the 12 miles of gravel road, thinking about her grandmother's phrasing and what it meant to say that something was not yours to use or to sell. What category of relationship to land that implied. What understanding of ownership it assumed. She pulled into the clearing and parked and went inside. Her grandmother's teacup was on the kitchen table. Nina stood in the doorway and looked at it. It was the cup her grandmother had used every morning for years. A plain, white ceramic cup with a small chip on the handle that Nina had known since childhood. She had washed it the previous morning when she was cleaning the kitchen, had washed it and dried it, and placed it on the shelf with the other cups. The chip facing inward, the cup upside down on the shelf the way you put cups on a shelf. She had been deliberate about it because the cup was her grandmother's, and she had been deliberate about all of her grandmother's things. The cup was on the kitchen table, right side up, with a tea bag in it. The tea bag was damp. She touched the side of the cup and it was warm. She had been gone for 2 hours. The cabin had been locked. She had the key in her jacket pocket and had used it to unlock the front door when she came in just now. The front door had been locked. She checked the windows, moving through the cabin, trying each one. All latched from the inside. The back window in the second bedroom, the kitchen window, the window in the main room. All latched. She went to the back hallway and checked the storage room exterior lock. Open again, the hasp hanging, the padlock unengaged. She stood in the back hallway and thought about the locked front door and the locked windows and the open storage room and the warm cup on the table. She thought about what those things meant together, what they implied about how someone or something was moving in and out of the cabin. The storage room had an exterior door. If something came in through the exterior storage room door and into the cabin through the interior storage room door, it would not need to use the windows or the front door. It would only need the storage room exterior lock to be open, which it always was. She went outside and walked around the north side of the cabin to the crawlspace vent. She had not thought about the crawlspace vent. It was on the north wall, a metal framed opening about 18 inches square, the kind of screened vent that allows airflow beneath a raised floor section. The cabin's main room sat slightly higher than the rest of the structure, raised a few feet on the north end where the ground sloped, and the crawlspace beneath it ran the length of the main room and connected, she now understood, to the underside of the storage room. The vent cover was leaning against the cabin wall, not on the ground, not damaged. Leaning against the wall beside the vent opening, the way you lean something when you have removed it carefully and set it aside. She crouched and looked into the crawlspace. It was dark inside, the kind of dark that does not resolve no matter how long you look at it. The smell that came out of the opening was cold earth and something else underneath the cold earth. Something she could not name with any word she had available. She would tell her daughter later, when she told her daughter the story, that it was like the hollow had a smell and the crawlspace had it. She did not know how else to describe it. The hollow to the south that her grandmother had kept closed for decades. That was not hers to use or to sell. And the crawlspace under the cabin had the same smell, as if, whatever the hollow was, it did not stop at the hollow's edge. She stood up. She was not panicking, she was counting. She was counting the ways in and out of the cabin and the ways in and out of the property. And she was thinking about the warm cup on the table and the open locks and the sound beneath the floor at 4:15 in the morning. The sound of something shifting its weight. The sound of something that had been there long enough to need to shift. she went back inside. She made a list of what she needed to pack. She was not leaving yet. It was the middle of the afternoon and the gravel road was manageable in daylight, and she had things she needed to take with her, and she was not going to leave without them. But she was going to be packed and ready before dark. She packed efficiently. Her bag, her cleaning supplies, her food. She took the quilt from the bed, folded it carefully, put it in the car. She went back inside and stood in the kitchen and looked at the sealed tin of tea on the shelf. She did not know why she took it. She took it anyway. She put it in the bag with the quilt. Then she sat down at the kitchen table and looked at the warm cup her grandmother used to use every morning, and she stayed there until the light outside the window began to change. She did not go back inside after dark. She had told herself she would make a decision about the second night when the time came, that she would assess how she felt when the light went, and decide then whether to sleep in the cabin or in the car. When the light went, there was no decision to make. She picked up her bag and her keys, and she walked out the front door, and she locked it behind her, and she got in the car, and she did not go back inside. She moved the car to face the cabin. She wanted to be able to see the front door and the porch and the clearing. She left the engine off, but she did not turn the key all the way out, kept the electronics live so the heater could run in short bursts when the car got too cold. She had her grandmother's quilt across her lap and the sealed tin of tea in the bag on the passenger seat and her phone on the dashboard, which showed no signal and 11% battery in the time, which was 7:43 in the evening. She had left every light on inside the cabin. Both bedroom lights, the kitchen light, the main room lamp, the bathroom light. From the car, she could see the warm yellow glow through the windows and the porch light buzzing above the front door. The cabin looked occupied. It looked the way it must have looked on all those evenings when her grandmother was inside it, lit from within, warm against the dark clearing and the dark tree line and the dark ridge above. She sat and watched it. Nothing moved in the clearing. The tree line was still. The gravel road ran straight from the front of the car to the edge of the tree line where it entered the woods and disappeared toward the county road. She could hear the night sounds of the property, the ridge wind, something small moving in the leaves at the clearing's edge, the distant sound of the creek in the hollow to the south that she could hear only when the wind was right. Around 9, she ate the last of the food she had not packed, crackers and the remains of a block of cheese, sitting in the car with the quilt over her lap and the porch light buzzing at the edge of her vision. Around 10, she reclined the seat slightly and tried to find a position that was sustainable for a long night. Around 11, she stopped trying to be comfortable and just sat upright and watched the cabin. At 11:58, the porch light went out. She registered it before she fully understood what she was seeing, the way you register change in light before your brain categorizes it. The porch was dark. The yellow glow through the windows was still there, the interior lights still on, but the porch light above the door was out. She looked at it for a moment. Bulbs burned out. That was the simple explanation. Old bulbs in a cabin that had been empty for 4 months. The porch light had been on for hours. Bulbs burned out. She thought about the switch. The porch light switch was inside the cabin, in the main room, beside the front door. She had flipped it herself when she came in that morning. The satisfying click of an old toggle switch. She was in the car. She had been in the car since 7:43. The switch was inside the locked cabin. The porch light did not come back on. She sat in the car and watched the dark porch and the lit windows for a long time. She watched for movement inside the cabin, shadows crossing the windows, any indication that something inside was moving through the lit rooms. She saw nothing. The light came through the windows and was still. The porch was dark. The clearing was dark beyond the reach of the headlights she was not using. She did not turn the headlights on. She did not want to see the clearing in the headlights. She did not want to know what the headlights might show her at the edge of the light's reach, at the tree line, at the south side of the clearing nearest the hollow. She sat in the dark with the quilt and the sealed tea, and watched the cabin's windows glow, and the porch stay dark. At 1:15, something moved on the far side of the cabin. She heard it rather than saw it. A sound from the direction of the storage room, the exterior wall of the north side. Not a dramatic sound. The kind of sound a careful thing makes when it is moving and trying not to make sound, and is not entirely successful. A single, soft displacement of gravel, one footstep's worth of sound, and then nothing. She did not start the car. She sat still and breathed carefully and kept her eyes on the cabin windows. If something was outside the cabin on the north side, it was outside her sight line from the car, blocked by the cabin structure, and she was not going to move the car to improve her sight line. The windows stayed lit. The porch stayed dark. The clearing stayed still. She sat in the car until 4:30 in the morning, and the black above the ridge began to shift toward the dark gray that preceded the false dawn. At 4:30, she allowed herself to recline the seat slightly again, and at some point after that she slept without meaning to, a shallow and fragmented sleep that ended when the light through the windshield changed enough to wake her. First, light. The clearing was visible. The tree line was visible. The cabin sat in the early gray light with its windows still faintly glowing. The interior lights she had left on running through the night, and the porch dark above the front door. The gravel drive was empty. The clearing was empty. She got out of the car. She went inside and she moved through the cabin in under 10 minutes. She did not clean anything further. She did not complete the inventory she had started. She took what she had already packed to the car, and she went back inside once more and walked through every room and looked at each one for a moment. The main room with the wood stove cold now, the ash pale. The kitchen with the empty shelf where the tin of tea had been. The bedroom with the quilt gone from the bed, the mattress bare. The hallway. She did not go to the storage room. She did not open that door. She did not go to the north side of the cabin and look at the gravel near the crawlspace vent to see what the gravel showed. She had made a decision somewhere in the night, sitting in the car watching the porch light stay dark, that there were things she did not need to verify. The warm cup had been enough. The open locks had been enough. The sound at 4:15 in the morning had been enough. She did not need more evidence. She needed to leave. She locked the front door and walked to the car and drove out. The gravel road was 12 miles, and she drove it carefully, the one-lane section in the trees requiring attention, the wider sections going faster. She came out onto the county road and turned toward the highway and kept driving. She did not stop until she reached the end of the gravel road, where it met the county road, and there she pulled over and called her mother. She said the cabin needed professional cleaning before it could be listed. She said there were some things that required attention before a realtor came through. Her mother said that was fine and asked if everything was all right, and Nina said yes. Everything was fine. She was just tired from the drive and the work, and she was heading home. Her mother said she would arrange for a cleaning service to go out before the realtor's visit. Nina said that sounded good. She did not tell her mother about the porch light or the teacup or the crawlspace vent or the sound beneath the floor. She did not tell her about the hollow to the south or what the woman at the post office had said or the smell that came out of the crawlspace in the dark. She drove home. It took most of the day. She stopped twice for gas and coffee, and she kept the radio on the whole time, something loud and ordinary, and she did not turn it off. 6 weeks later, the realtor called Nina's mother. He said the cabin was in good shape overall, well-built structure, sound roof, good bones. He said there was one thing he wanted to mention, which was that the storage room had been rearranged. Items moved from the shelves and stacked against the walls. The center of the room cleared, as if someone had been making space for something or had been using the room for a purpose that required an open floor area. He said he assumed a family member had done some work out there and had not finished tidying up, and he wanted to flag it in case the family preferred it restored to its original arrangement before showings. Nina's mother said she would look into it. The realtor also mentioned, almost as an afterthought, that the back bedroom had an unusual smell. Not a bad smell exactly, he said, more like a mineral smell, like earth, like something coming up through the floor. He said he thought it might be a dead animal under the cabin, maybe something that had gotten into the crawl space and not gotten out, and he recommended having it checked before the listing went active. An inspector went out the following week. He found no dead animal. He found no animal remains of any kind in the crawl space. He noted that the crawl space vent cover on the north side was not attached to the frame, and recommended it be secured before the listing. The smell he could not account for. He noted in his report that by the time of his inspection it was no longer present. The cabin listed in January. It sold in 8 months, which the realtor told Nina's mother was faster than average for a property that remote. Nina asked her mother once who had bought it. Her mother said she did not know the buyers personally, that it had been handled through the realtor, that they were not local as far as she knew. Nina asked if her mother could find out more. Her mother said she would try and then change the subject in a way that reminded Nina of something she could not immediately place, and then she placed it. It was the same redirect, the same practiced smoothness of a subject being closed that Garrett had described in his district supervisor, that Lyle's wife had described in Lyle himself when certain questions came up. Nina did not ask again. She kept the quilt. It is on her bed now, in the apartment in the city where she has lived for 4 years, the same quilt her grandmother made, and that she slept under as a child, and that she carried out of the cabin on the last morning. It is heavy and warm, and it smells very faintly of cedar and wood smoke. The smell of the cabin, the smell of her grandmother's life in that place. The sealed tin of tea is on a shelf in her kitchen. Her grandmother's brand, her grandmother's handwriting on a small sticker she had put over the price tag years ago, the letters in the careful print of someone who had been taught to write by hand when that still meant something. The foil pull tab is intact. The tin has never been opened. Nina does not use that shelf for anything else. The tin sits alone on it, label facing out, the way her grandmother kept things that were meant to be seen and remembered. Nina looks at it sometimes when she is in the kitchen, and sometimes she does not look at it and knows it is there anyway, the weight of it in her awareness even when she is not looking at it directly. She does not know why she took it. She took it because it was her grandmother's and because it was there. And because in the moment of leaving she had wanted something of her grandmother's that was sealed and whole and untouched, something that had not been opened or moved or interfered with, something that was still exactly what it had always been. She has not opened it. She does not plan to open it. She told her daughter, when she told her the story, that opening it felt like it would mean something she was not ready to know. And her daughter, who knew the oldest rule on a different piece of land without having been told why, understood exactly what she meant. The hollow to the south of the cabin is still there. It was not part of the sale. Nina's mother confirmed this when Nina asked, months after the closing. The property boundary had been drawn to exclude the hollow, had always been drawn that way, going back to the original deed from 1947 when her grandfather had purchased the land. The hollow was listed in county records as unincorporated land, no owner of record, no tax parcel, no designation of any kind. It was simply land that had no owner and had never had one, as far as the county's records went back. Not hers to use, not hers to sell. Her grandmother had known. She had known for decades, had lived on that property for decades with the hollow to the south, and whatever terms the hollow carried, and she had kept those terms without explaining them, had kept them the way you keep something that works by being kept and fails by being spoken. She had drunk her tea every morning at the kitchen table by the window, and she had tended the wood stove, and she had maintained the terms, and the hollow had stayed where it was, and the cabin had stayed what it was, and the family had come and gone for decades without any of them knowing what she was doing. Now she was gone, and the cabin had been sold to someone Nina did not know, and the hollow was still there, unowned, undesignated, not on any parcel map. Nina thinks about the new owners sometimes. She does not know if they have been told about the hollow. She does not know if the realtor knew enough to tell them, or if the county records were specific enough for anyone to understand what the undesignated land to the south implied, or if whoever bought the cabin is simply living there now, in the way that people live in places they have chosen, without knowing the terms. She has thought about trying to contact them. She has not done it. She does not know what she would say that would not sound like exactly what it would sound like, and she does not know if knowing would help them or only frighten them without giving them the tools her grandmother had developed over decades of living there. The tools were in the living. They were in the knowing of the place, in the accumulated small decisions of a life spent understanding what the land asked and giving it what it asked without naming the transaction. Nina did not have those tools. She had 3 days and a sealed tin of tea and a quilt, and a sound she heard at 4:15 in the morning that she will not forget. The cabin sold. The hollow stayed. The tea stays sealed on the shelf in Nina's kitchen. Her grandmother's handwriting on the label, the foil pull tab intact. Everything inside it exactly as it was the last time her grandmother touched it. Nina is in the kitchen sometimes, early in the morning, and she looks at the tin without meaning to. She looks at it the way you look at something that holds a question you have not decided whether to ask. Her grandmother drank that tea every morning. The same brand, the same ritual, the same cup with the chip on the handle. The cup is gone now, left on the table in the cabin that belongs to someone else. But the tea is here, sealed, waiting. She does not know what her grandmother knew. She does not know what the tea means or why the tin was full and sealed and left behind on that shelf. She does not know if her grandmother left it as a provision for a return she did not make, or as something intended to be found, or as something that simply existed in the way that the hollow existed, without ownership, without explanation, under terms that were not hers to pass on and not Nina's to receive. She leaves it sealed. She does not throw it away. Some mornings she stands in the kitchen and does not look at it and knows it is there, and that is enough.